I remember the first night like it was yesterday, even though it feels like it belonged to someone else, someone who walked those empty hallways before I ever set foot in that place. I'd just been hired as a night guard at St. Gerard's Hospital. Not exactly a glamorous job, but the pay was steady and it was quiet. Too quiet, as I would soon find out. The hospital had been closed for nearly a decade. No patients, no doctors, just the skeleton of a place that once buzzed with life. Broken wheelchairs, peeling paint, and the lingering smell of antiseptic that never truly left, even years later. My first night was supposed to be simple: walk the floors, check the locks, log anything unusual. Easy. Or at least that's what I told myself. I arrived just before midnight. The front doors groaned when I pushed them open, like the building itself was waking up. The lobby was dark, the dusty lights flickering in some stubborn attempt to shine. I ran my fingers along the reception desk, leaving faint prints in a layer of dust, and tried to ignore the chill creeping up my spine. The quiet was overwhelming. No hum of machines, no distant chatter, nothing but the sound of my own boots on the tile. I started my rounds, clipboard in hand, flashlight cutting through the shadows. The main corridor stretched ahead like tunnels, each corner sharper than the last. The longer I walked, the heavier the air felt, as if the building was pressing in on me. Shadows stretched across the walls, not quite moving, but not quite still either. I caught myself thinking I'd seen figures in the corners of my eyes, but every time I turned, there was nothing, just walls, doors, and occasional peeling paint. I found the nurse's station first. It was almost pristine in its decay. Papers still stacked, pens in their holders, a calendar frozen in the year it closed. I ran my hand over the old desk, and a cold draft brushed past my neck, making the hairs rise. I told myself it was just the broken windows or the old ventilation system, but deep down I didn't believe it. I moved to the surgical wing next. The doors were heavy metal, rusted shut in some places, but I managed to force one open. The smell hit me first, stale metallic, like blood left too long. Sunlight hadn't touched these rooms in years, and the air was thick, almost tangible. My flashlight beam danced across the tile, catching on overturned chairs and rusting equipment. And then I saw it, a shadow, longer than any human could be, stretching across the floor. I froze. I convinced myself it was just the angle of the light, or maybe a trick of my imagination. I had to keep moving. The hospital was huge, and I had a lot of ground to cover before my shift ended. But every time I passed a corner, every time I looked down a hallway, it felt like something was watching me, not with eyes, but with awareness, like the building itself was alive and waiting. At one point, I entered a patient room. The bed was still there, sheets faded and torn. The bedside table had an old, cracked lamp, and in the dim glow, I thought I saw someone sitting there. I blinked. Nothing. Just the bed, just the quiet. My heart was thudding in my chest now, louder than I'd ever heard it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to remember this was just a building. Old. Empty. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Somewhere down the hallway. I froze, straining to hear over my own breathing. The sound was soft, but it carried, echoing off the walls. I whispered to myself that no one else was supposed to be here, that it had to be the creak of the floors. But my gut told me otherwise. The steps stopped. Silence. And then a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, only that it came from nowhere and everywhere at once. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, shining it down the hall. The beam caught the edges of something moving, a figure or maybe just a shadow, shifting as I moved the light. I told myself it was my imagination, but the instinct in my chest, the one that tells you when you're in real danger, was screaming at me to leave. I gripped the flashlight tighter and kept walking, forcing myself to check the next corridor, the next room. The longer I stayed, the more I noticed the little things. Doors that would be closed one moment and open the next. Soft taps on the walls, like fingernails brushing against wood. The faint smell of disinfectant mixed with something else, something rotten, decaying. And the shadows, always the shadows, curling in corners, stretching across hallways, sometimes catching the shape of a person, sometimes not. By 3 in the morning, I was shaking. I tried calling into the front office to let them know I was okay, that everything was fine. The radio crackled and hissed, static mostly, but every now and then I could swear I heard a voice whispering my name. I laughed nervously, trying to tell myself it was just interference, but the voice didn't stop. It followed me, soft, patient, like it was waiting for me to notice. I reached the cafeteria at the far end of the hospital. The room was massive, tables still lined up neatly, chairs tucked in. I sat down on one of the benches, trying to calm my racing heart. That's when I noticed a reflection in the polished surface of the table. I could see something behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But in the reflection, there was a figure, hunched, dark, impossibly still. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked again. Gone. I don't know how I made it through the rest of that shift. Every shadow, every whisper, every subtle movement had me on edge. I kept telling myself it was an old building, settling noises, drafts, my imagination. But something in me knew better. Something that knew the building had memory, had a presence, and that presence had noticed me. When the morning came, I didn't run. I couldn't. I walked out slowly, every step heavy, feeling eyes on my back the entire way. The doors groaned again as I pushed them open. Daylight didn't make me feel better. The hospital loomed behind me, silent, patient, waiting for the next night, the next guard, the next person foolish enough to think it was empty. Even now, when I tell this story, I can feel it. That first night wasn't just my introduction to St. Gerard's Hospital. It was a warning, and I didn't listen. The shadows, they are still there. I don't think anyone ever warns you about the quiet in a place like St. Gerard's Hospital. Not the absence of sound, but the sound of almost nothing. The kind that presses against your ears and makes every small noise echo too loudly. That's what got me first on my second night. The building didn't just feel empty. It felt aware, like it remembered every footstep, every voice, every small mistake that ever happened here. And now it was waiting to see me stumble. I arrived a little earlier than my shift that night. Maybe it was nerves, maybe it was curiosity. I kept telling myself I was ready this time, that the shadows and the echoes from my first night were just my imagination. But as soon as I stepped inside the lobby, the air hit me differently, heavier, more patient. I took a deep breath, trying to push it down, but my chest tightened. There was something in the air that I could feel brushing against my skin, like invisible fingers tracing the back of my neck. I started my rounds. The same hallways, the same peeling paint, but somehow different. Shadows weren't just at the corners of my vision anymore. They moved, subtly, fleetingly. Nothing I could point to or name. Just shapes, blurs. Like someone was walking behind me, just out of sight, and stepping away whenever I tried to look directly at them. It started in the West Wing. I was checking the old patient rooms, moving slowly down the hallway, flashlight cutting narrow slices through the darkness. The beam hit an empty bed, then something just beyond it, quick, almost imperceptible, a shift in the darkness. My heart jumped. I told myself it was a curtain swaying in a draft. I kept walking, but every few steps, I felt again, that flicker in the corner of my vision, like someone was following, and then the whispers started. At first, it was nothing more than a breath, a soft sigh that could have been the ventilation, but then the sound became words, so faint I could barely catch them. Not real words, not yet, just syllables, fragments, like the building was testing me. I froze, heart hammering. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice cracking. The corridor stayed silent, but the whispers didn't stop. I forced myself forward, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The voices were always just behind me, shifting with me, sometimes sounding like laughter, sometimes like quiet murmurs. I couldn't place a direction. One moment, they seemed to come from the room at the end of the hall. The next, from behind the corner I had just passed. Every time I tried to focus, they scattered, leaving only the faintest echo. I reached the nurse's station again. The papers had shifted from where I remembered them. I didn't move them. I didn't touch anything. And yet, I swear a folded sheet that had been on the counter was now slightly askew, like someone or something had brushed it with long, careful fingers. The whispers seemed louder here, though still soft enough to be dismissed. My ears ached from trying to catch them, and my stomach twisted into knots. I forced myself into the next hallway. The walls seemed narrower now, the ceiling lower and the shadows denser. My flashlight picked up faint outlines sometimes. A figure standing in the corner, just a blur, nothing definite. I spun around, expecting someone to be there. Nothing. No one. Only the oppressive quiet and that soft, patient whispering that followed me like a shadow of sound. I remember the staircase most vividly. It led down to the basement, where the old records and equipment were kept. I needed to check it for the rounds. The steps creaked under my weight, louder than they had any right to. Halfway down, I thought I saw a movement at the bottom, a figure, or maybe just a trick of the light, standing in the corner where the stairs met the floor. I froze. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. I whispered to myself, trying to calm the rising panic. It's just shadows. Just shadows. You've been here before. Nothing is real. The figure moved, or I moved my head too fast. But when I looked again, it was gone, in its place. The faintest outline of something hunched, its edges blurring into the darkness. And the whispers were louder here, sharper. One of them even sounded like my name. I stopped. My breath caught. The words were gone the instant I tried to focus, leaving only that cold, crawling dread along my spine. I descended the rest of the stairs slowly, heart hammering, telling myself I had to finish the rounds. The basement was worse than I remembered. Low ceilings, narrow halls, the air musty and wet. Boxes and broken equipment lined the walls, and shadows pooled in the corners. My flashlight's beam couldn't reach far enough, and every time it swept past, I felt something move just beyond it. The whispers followed me, but now they weren't random. I could almost understand them. Fragments, syllables that sounded like names. The sound was too soft to be intelligible, but my brain tried to piece it together anyway. And every time it felt like I understood, it slipped away, leaving me with that hollow, uneasy feeling that I wasn't alone. Not by a long shot. I came across a door that shouldn't have been there, or at least I hadn't noticed it before. It was partially open, just enough for a sliver of darkness to escape, and from inside came the faintest whisper, distinct and deliberate. I didn't move closer. I couldn't. Something in me refused to step into that room, yet I couldn't look away. The whisper was patient, coaxing, like it had been waiting for me. I remember gripping the doorframe, telling myself I was imagining it, and maybe I was, but the shadows didn't lie. They shifted when I moved, never leaving, always at the edge of my vision. And when I looked directly at them, they seemed to recede, only to return when I wasn't looking. My mind was a tangle of fear and disbelief. I kept moving, checking the other rooms, my flashlight trembling. Every corner held movement. Every doorway held a whisper. The whispers weren't cruel. Exactly. They weren't yelling or threatening. They were patient, watching, waiting for me to acknowledge them. It was a silence that was unbearable, the knowledge that something unseen was aware of me, studying me in a way that made my skin crawl. Time blurred in the basement. I stopped looking at the clock because it didn't matter. Minutes or hours, it all felt the same. The whispers never stopped. Every now and then, I would hear a soft scraping sound, like nails against walls, or the faint shuffle of feet when no one else was there. And the shadows, always moving, never fully seen, never gone. I thought about leaving. I thought about just abandoning my shift and running straight to the front doors. But the hospital felt alive, like it would notice, like it would follow me. And I couldn't stop thinking that maybe it already knew my name, already knew I was afraid. That thought alone made me keep moving, slow steps, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. By the time I finished my rounds in the basement and climbed back to the first floor, I was shaking. My hands were numb from gripping the flashlight so tightly. My stomach churned and my ears were still straining for whispers that weren't there, or maybe were. I didn't speak to anyone that night. I didn't even want a radio in. I just walked the halls, following the routine, trying to convince myself I was okay. But I wasn't. The rest of the night passed in a blur. shadows at the corners of my vision, whispers at the edges of hearing. Nothing ever fully revealed itself. And yet the presence was constant, waiting, patient, and I knew, even then, that the hospital had chosen me as its audience. It didn't need to show itself fully. The fear, the creeping doubt, the paranoia, that was enough. That was the point. When the sun finally started to push through the boarded-up windows, I felt a flicker of relief, but it was faint. The building didn't change. The whispers didn't vanish entirely. They became quieter, but I could still hear them if I listened too closely. And the shadows, they still lingered, faint and insistent. I left that night with the same heavy feeling I'd had the first time, only worse. The knowledge that St. Gerard's wasn't just empty, and it wasn't just old. It was alive in ways I couldn't name. And it had been watching me, learning me, whispering to me, waiting for the next night, the next shift, the next person who thought they could simply walk through its halls and remain unobserved. Even now, I can hear them sometimes. In quiet moments when I'm alone, soft voices at the edge of hearing, shadows at the corner of my vision. It's never ending. And I know it's still there, waiting, patient, whispering my name. I don't think anyone ever really expects to find a locked door in an empty hospital. At least, not one that feels like it belongs to a living thing rather than a building. On my third night at St. Gerard's, that's exactly what I found. I had finished my usual rounds, checking the West Wing again, flashlight in hand, heart still thumping from the shadows and whispers of the basement. I had convinced myself, briefly, that the worst of it was over, that the building had shown me enough to scare me, but not enough to truly harm me. But then I saw the door. It was at the far end of the hallway. I had passed countless times before. It wasn't marked, not with a sign, not with a number, just a heavy steel frame, paint peeling, rust eating away at the edges. But what drew my attention wasn't the door itself. It was the way it seemed wrong. The edges didn't line up with the wall. The gap beneath it shifted, almost breathing. And when I looked straight at it, I felt that same awareness I'd felt since the first night. The hospital was watching me again. I tried the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. But the lock wasn't the kind I could pick or force. It was old, corroded, yet somehow it resisted me with a presence that felt deliberate. I leaned closer, pressing my palm against the cold steel, and I swear the door trembled. A faint vibration ran through my fingers. My stomach knotted. I stepped back, breathing fast. Maybe it was my imagination. That had been my excuse for the last 2 nights. And maybe it would work again. But the second I turned away, the door creaked. A long, slow, deliberate creak, as if it had opened just enough for me to notice. I froze. Nothing was there, but the air changed. Thicker now, heavier, almost tactile. The walls themselves seemed to stretch toward me, warping subtly, like the building was bending around the door, emphasizing it, isolating it. I tried to ignore it. I walked past, telling myself I didn't need to see what was behind it, that the hospital had secrets it didn't want to share. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, wouldn't let me. I came back after checking the West Wing one more time. The hallway was darker than before, shadows pooling along the floor, edges sharp and shifting. And the door, it was slightly ajar. Not a creak, not a push, just moved. I knew I hadn't touched it. No one had. No one was supposed to be here. I swallowed hard. The rational part of me told me to leave it, to ignore it, to check the rest of the hospital and call it a night. But the other part, the part one didn't trust, urged me forward. Something about that door, about the way the air pressed against my skin, demanded attention. I pushed it open. The hinges protested with a sound that made me wince, and a wave of cold air rolled out, smelling of damp earth and rusted metal. The room, or maybe wing, was dark, deeper than it should have been. My flashlight caught the edges of a hallway that stretched impossibly far, doors lining both sides, some closed, some ajar. The walls were peeling, but the paint looked wet, as if the building itself were sweating. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching, shifting, and I realized, slowly, that the wing wasn't just old or abandoned. It was alive in its own way. I stepped inside. The door shut behind me with a soft thud, though I had left it wide open. I spun around, but there was no one there. Only shadows, moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight. The walls themselves seemed to pulse subtly, like the heartbeat of the building had found me and was teasing me. Drawing me in, I moved down the hallway slowly, each step cautious, careful. My mind raced, trying to rationalize everything. Old buildings shift, paint peels, doors stick, shadows play tricks. But my instinct screamed that none of this was normal. The air smelled faintly of iron, like blood, and something else. Something I couldn't name. Hung in the corners, almost visible, almost solid. I passed a series of rooms. Most were empty, with beds overturned or rusted equipment scattered across the floor. But some had anomalies. Curtains that twitched when there was no breeze. Chairs that shifted slightly when I wasn't looking. And in one room, the floor itself seemed to ripple, like the tiles were breathing beneath my feet. I stopped, my breath fog in the cold air. I told myself I was hallucinating, that I was tired, that the hospital was old, warped, haunted by memories, not by anything alive. But the whisper came then, soft and deliberate, from somewhere down the corridor. Stay. Not a shout, not a scream, just a single, soft syllable. And I froze, my hand tightening around the flashlight. The beam caught a figure in the corner of a room, just a shadow at first. But then, the edges sharpened, like it was molding itself in the darkness, curling toward me. I blinked, and it was gone. But the whisper remained, patient, coaxing, waiting. I turned the corner slowly. Every nerve in my body screamed to run. And then I saw it, a door slightly different from the others. Darker, older. The edges warped like it had grown rather than been built. It pulsed subtly like breathing. I approached careful. The whisper grew louder, though still soft, almost gentle. Come, it said. I forced myself to step back. I couldn't. I shouldn't. But I did. My curiosity, my fear, both mingled into something I couldn't resist. I reached out, touching the door. It was warmer than it should have been. Alive, maybe in some way I couldn't explain. The moment my hand made contact, the walls shifted subtly, as if leaning closer, watching. The whisper became almost a murmur, a gentle insistence. And then the door moved, not the way a door should. It slid slightly, as if nudged by something unseen. My heart lurched. I yanked my hand back. The shadow at the end of the hallway stretched, elongating, flickering like it couldn't hold its shape. And I realized the door wasn't just moving. It was breathing with the wing itself, alive in a way that felt deliberate, intelligent. I backed up slowly, shining the flashlight across the walls. Every surface seemed to shift subtly. Lines warped, corners bent, shadows clung, sliding closer when I looked away, retreating when I stared. The building was aware of me. Every step I took, every breath I drew, it noticed, and I couldn't leave. Not yet. I took another step forward. Compelled despite the fear, the whisper followed me, soft, patient, insistent. It wasn't a voice of malice. Not exactly. It was a lure, a promise, a demand. I could feel it pressing against my mind, threading into my thoughts, coaxing me to look deeper, to move further. I reached the end of the hall. There was another door, solid, iron-bound, older than anything else I had seen. The whisper came again, clearer this time, though still faint. Inside, I tried to ignore it. I tried to turn back. But the walls behind me seemed to stretch, closing slightly, narrowing the hallway. The door in front of me pulsed subtly, breathing in rhythm with the whispers. And I knew that if I didn't enter, the wing would follow me, bend around me, keep me trapped in its corridors until I obeyed. My flashlight flickered. Shadows surged in the corners. The air grew thick, almost liquid, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I told myself it was the old wiring, the dampness, the cold. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The building was alive. The wing had memory. It had awareness. And it had me. I pressed my hand against the door again, warmer this time, almost pulsing under my palm. The whisper became a breath against my ear. Come inside, stay. I stumbled back. My mind raced. I needed to leave. I needed to escape, but the hallway had changed. Doors that had been there before were gone. Corners that were solid now dissolved into darkness. I was trapped in the wing. The building had shifted around me, molding the space like clay, guiding me toward that door, toward whatever it wanted me to see. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time didn't exist in the locked wing. The whisper never stopped, a constant, patient hum at the edge of my hearing. Shadows flickered and stretched, some taking shapes too human to ignore. I could feel eyes on me, or maybe just the impression of eyes, watching my every movement. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, staring at that door, listening to the whispers, feeling the walls pulse and breathe. Every instinct screamed to run. Every part of me knew that I shouldn't be there. And yet, something about the wing demanded I stay, demanded I see, demanded I witness. When my shift finally ended, I managed to leave. Somehow, the door behind me closed softly, without sound, as if nothing had ever been opened. The hallway straightened, the walls solidified, the shadows retreated, and the whispers faded, though I could still hear them faintly if I listened too closely. But I knew, as I walked out of that wing, that it wasn't over. The locked wing was alive, patient, waiting, and it remembered me. Even now, sometimes when I close my eyes, I see the walls pulse, the shadows stretch, the door breathing, whispering. I know one day I might go back. I know the locked wing won't let me leave completely, and I know, deep down, that it's only a matter of time before it calls me inside again. I thought I knew St. Gerard's Hospital by the time I reached my fourth night. I thought the shadows, the whispers, the shifting walls were warnings I could read, that I could manage, that I could survive. I was wrong. The first hours of that night started like any other. I walked the hallways, flashlights slicing through the darkness, noting each room, each peeling wall, each strange shifting shadow. But this time, something felt different. The air itself seemed heavier, thicker, pressing it on me from all sides. The whispers were no longer faint, playful fragments. They were deliberate, insistent, following me wherever I went. And the shadows weren't just at the corners of my vision anymore. They were closer, sharper, moving just behind me, but never fully seen. I tried to stay rational. Old building, tired mind, too many late nights. I told myself it was paranoia, and I repeated the mantra silently, over and over like a prayer. It's just a building. It's just a building. It's just a building. But the mantra didn't help. The building had learned my voice. It knew the rhythm of my breathing. Every time I whispered those words, the shadows would shift slightly, the walls would pulse, and the whispering would grow louder. I reached the lobby around 2 a.m. The same lobby I had passed countless times before, but now it felt different, wider somehow. The ceiling seemed higher, the lights flickering a pattern I had never noticed. And then I realized I couldn't find the front doors. I swore I had passed them a dozen times. I had even checked the locks that night. They weren't where they should have been. The hallways stretched endlessly in one direction, bending impossibly around corners that shouldn't exist. Panic started to rise. My heartbeat was loud, drowning out even the faintest whispers. I ran my fingers along the walls, trying to orient myself. They weren't solid, not fully. They felt almost alive, subtle vibrations running under my fingertips, like the hospital itself was aware of me, responding to my fear. Every step I took, every breath I drew, the walls seemed to pulse in time in my heart, keeping me trapped, guiding me towards some unseen destination. I tried the stairwells. Up, down, nothing made sense. Doors that led to exits on the floor plan now open onto endless corridors. Rooms I didn't remember seeing before, each one dark and silent, yet thick with expectation. The whispers followed me, now forming shapes in my mind. Words I couldn't quite hear clearly, but tones I understood. Anticipation, patience, hunger. The building wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to claim me. I ran back to the nurse's station, hoping to find something familiar, some anchor to reality. The papers were in piles I didn't recognize. Pens rolled across the counter as if nudged by invisible hands. My reflection in the glass panels didn't line up with my movements. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and for a moment, I thought I saw someone standing behind me, a shape tall and dark, impossibly still. I spun around. Nothing. No one. Just a whispering. Just the shadows curling along the walls. I forced myself to leave that room, to continue my rounds. But every corridor I passed seemed to fold in on itself, stretching and twisting like the hospital was breathing, alive and aware. I felt like I was walking inside a maze that shifted with my every step, a place that refused to let me leave. The whispers followed me relentlessly, now calling faint, almost familiar phrases. My own name, maybe, or perhaps echoes of voices I didn't remember hearing before. The effect was the same. My stomach churned. My knees shook. My flashlight flickered, threatening to die, leaving me in the oppressive darkness for long enough to imagine the shadows brushing against me, watching, testing me. I tried to call the front office, to radio in, to let someone know I couldn't find my way out. The radio crackled uselessly, filling the empty hospital with static. And then, faint behind the static, a voice. Not my supervisors, not anyone I knew. A low, deliberate whisper. Don't leave. My blood ran cold. I dropped the radio. I walked faster, flashlight shaking in my hands. I had to find the doors, had to leave, but every hallway I turned down led me back to places I'd already passed. Rooms twisted into corridors. Doors disappeared. Shadows stretched, elongated, reaching for me from the corners of my vision, only to vanish when I tried to face them directly. It was relentless, like the hospital itself had decided that I wasn't allowed to leave. By 3 a.m, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a building with strange echoes. It was intelligent, patient. It had noticed me from the moment I first walked in, learning the rhythm of my fear, feeding on it, shaping the space around me until leaving was no longer an option. My chest tightened with every step, my heart thundering in my ears, yet I couldn't stop. Somewhere deep in my mind, a voice whispered, "Survival is not the point. Understanding is irrelevant. The hospital is patience itself." I tried to cling to rational thought. Maybe this was sleep deprivation. Maybe it was a fever I hadn't noticed, or the accumulation of fear from the last 3 nights. But logic didn't help. The walls continued to pulse subtly, breathing along with me. The shadows didn't just move. They stretched toward me, waiting, coiling, sometimes forming shapes too human to ignore. I remember reaching a set of double doors I thought led to the lobby. I threw them open, expecting to see the exit, but the sun wasn't there. There was no lobby, no front doors, only a corridor stretching endlessly, bending impossibly, lined with patient rooms that hadn't existed before. I turned, searching for familiar markers. Nothing. My flashlight illuminated only shifting shadows and walls that seemed to lean in, watching. The whispers were louder now, clearer. Not words exactly, but a tone, a demand. "Stay, stay." My stomach clenched. My mind scrambled. I had to leave. I had to escape. But the hospital had other plans. The space itself was against me, folding, twisting, pushing me toward an unknown destination I could feel more than see. I ran blindly. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, reverberating as though the halls themselves were amplifying my fear. Shadows flickered in every corner, sometimes catching the shape of a person, sometimes dissolving into nothing. I could feel them brushing past me. But when I spun around, there was no one, only the whispers, the soft insistence, the patient attention of a building that refused to let me leave. Hours, minutes? I couldn't tell. Time no longer existed here. My flashlight flickered, leaving me in brief moments of suffocating darkness. And every time the light returned, the hallway had shifted slightly, changed subtly, guiding me, trapping me, testing me. The building wasn't just haunted. It was alive. It remembered me. It had learned me. And it had decided I wasn't allowed to go. Finally, I stumbled into a room that looked vaguely familiar. The cafeteria, I think. But even that wasn't right. The tables were stacked differently. Chairs leaned at odd angles. And in the corner, a figure. Not fully visible, but I felt it there, patient, observing, waiting. The whisper came again, faint but deliberate. "You belong." I froze. My flashlight shook in my hand. The air was cold, thick, almost viscous. Every instinct told me to run. But my legs felt heavy, as if the building itself was holding me down. And then I realized the hospital didn't want me to run. It wanted me to understand that leaving was impossible, that the shadows, the whispers, the shifting walls, they were all part of it, and I was part of them now, when dawn finally broke. Though I'm not sure if it was real or imagined, I stumbled out of the hospital. The front doors were where they should have been, or at least close enough. I pushed them open, the cold morning air hitting me like a slap, and for a moment I thought I was free. I wasn't. I walked home, every step heavy, heart still hammering, and I could feel it. The building didn't stop at its doors. The shadows, the whispers, the patient awareness, it followed me. I glanced back at the hospital, half expecting to see it leaning, breathing, watching. There was nothing visible, but I could feel its presence, a weight pressing against the edges of my mind, a subtle insistence that I hadn't truly left. That day, I tried to convince myself I was safe. I showered, I ate, I tried to sleep. But even in my apartment, I could hear the faintest whispers, just at the edge of hearing, just below the threshold of consciousness. Shadows seemed to linger in the corners of rooms, stretching unnaturally when I wasn't looking. And I realized then, with a cold, creeping certainty, that St. Gerard's doesn't let go. Once it knows you, once it notices you, you can leave physically, but it will always follow, always watch, always wait. I haven't returned since that night. I tell myself I won't, that I've learned my lesson, but the whispers don't care about my resolve. The shadows don't care that I'm no longer inside. They linger at the corners of my vision, in quiet moments, in the pause between breaths. And I know deep down that the hospital is patient. It will wait. It will follow. And one day, when I least expect it, it will claim me again. I can feel it now, even as I speak these words. That presence, subtle, patient, relentless. The hospital refuses to let me leave, and I am only just beginning to understand what that means. It's not about fear. It's not about pain. It's about knowing. And I know now that wherever I go, whatever I do, I am never truly alone. St. Gerard's is with me, and it always will be. I didn't expect the forest to be this quiet. Not really. I'd worked night shift before in factories, warehouses, empty office buildings. But there was a different kind of quiet in the forest. A waiting kind of quiet. The kind that makes your ears strain for sound that isn't there yet. My post was a small outpost, one of those rickety wooden huts with a single flickering lamp, perched at the edge of a clearing. The radio was my only connection to the outside world, my only proof that I wasn't completely alone. The first few hours of my shift passed slowly. I watched the shadows of the trees stretch and twist under the moonlight, the wind rustling through the branches like faint whispers. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, just the forest, silent but aware. Then the static started. At first, it was nothing, just the usual crackle of old equipment, interference from the surrounding trees. I adjusted the frequency, fiddled with the knobs. The static stayed, thicker now, almost rhythmic, like a pulse. And then, faint beneath the white noise, I thought I heard something. A voice, a whisper. I froze. Hello. I lifted the radio closer to my ear. The voice was distorted, broken, like it had traveled through miles of wire and air, bending and warping. My pulse quickened. Hello, I said, my voice shaky. The radio hissed back at me. Then silence. I leaned back in my chair, trying to shake it off. Could be someone on another outpost messing with me. Could be my imagination. I kept telling myself that. But the static didn't go away. It grew louder, more insistent, filling the small hut with its sharp, crackling presence. And every now and then, just under the white noise, I thought I heard words. Not complete sentences, just fragments. A name, a warning, a laugh almost too faint to notice. I gripped the radio tighter. Who's there? My own words sounded small in the emptiness, swallowed by the static. And then it came again, clearer this time. Don't. I froze. My fingers went cold. Don't what? I whispered, almost afraid to say it aloud. The radio hissed, and the word repeated, more distorted, more deliberate. Don't leave, don't. The forest outside seemed to shift. The wind picked up, or maybe I imagined it. Branches tapped against the hut like claws. Or maybe my mind was just playing tricks. My heart was racing now. Louder than the radio, louder than the wind. Every instinct screamed to run, to turn the radio off, to forget the night ever happened. But I didn't. I couldn't. The voice, or whatever it was, had my attention, and I couldn't let go. I adjusted the dial again, trying to find a clear channel. Nothing. Only static. Only faint whispers weaving in and out of the white noise. I caught fragments of words, phrases that made no sense but made my stomach twist. Come, here, waiting name. I couldn't piece them together. And every time I thought I understood, the words twisted into something else, teasing, taunting, just out of comprehension. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell if it was 1 hour or 3. I kept the radio on, unable to turn it off, unable to ignore it. Every sound in the forest seemed amplified now. The rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, the distant snap of twigs. And sometimes I thought I could hear something moving closer, though the moonlight showed nothing. Just shadows stretching unnaturally across the clearing, brushing at the edges of my vision. I tried to call for backup over the radio, trying to tell someone what I was hearing, what I was feeling. But the moment I spoke, the static swelled, drowning out my words. And then, through the interference, I heard a laugh. Not human, not like anyone I'd ever heard. Low, patient, echoing. It wasn't loud, but it was there, undeniable, and it made my blood run cold. I leaned back, trying to calm myself, telling myself I was tired, imagining things, projecting fear into the empty forest. But even as I told myself that, I noticed something else. The whispers weren't random anymore. They had a rhythm, a pattern. They seemed to follow me, responding to my movements, my breathing, my heartbeat. Every time I moved closer to the edge of the clearing, the static pulsed, the voice warped, almost guiding me back, almost corralling me, keeping me within some unseen boundary. I remember standing up suddenly, trying to shut the radio off, to stop listening, to stop hearing. But when I hit the switch, the static didn't die. It grew louder, almost screaming, and the whispers became insistent. As they don't come, I stumbled backward, heart hammering. My hands shook as I dropped the radio, and it clattered to the floor. The static swirled around it, almost alive, as if the device itself was aware of my fear, feeding off it, amplifying it. I backed toward the wall of the hut, eyes scanning the clearing through the open window. Shadows moved at the edges, brushing across the moonlight in ways that didn't make sense. Branches twisted like they were bending toward me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure among the trees, tall, impossibly still, almost blending with the night. I blinked. Gone. I told myself I was imagining it. I had to, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the forest wasn't empty, that the radio wasn't broken, that the whispers weren't random. Something out there was aware of me, patient, waiting, and the static wasn't just interference. It was a conduit, a bridge. Something wanted to reach me, wanted me to hear, wanted me to listen. I crouched beside the radio, hands trembling, trying to understand it, trying to make sense of the voices. The words came again, broken, distorted, just under comprehension. Name, waiting, follow, hear, and then laughter again. Low, soft, deliberate, echoing across the clearing. I wanted to scream, to throw the radio into the forest, to run until the trees themselves couldn't hold me. But something rooted me there. Something in the sound, in the rhythm of the static, demanded attention. Time slipped. The night stretched endlessly. I stopped looking at the edges of the clearing. Stopped trying to see what might be out there. I focused on the radio, listening to the pattern, listening to the distortion. And slowly, painfully, I began to feel it, not just with my ears, but in my chest and my mind. The static was alive. The whispers weren't just sounds. They were awareness, probing, testing, learning. They didn't care about me personally. They only cared that I heard, that I understood, that I acknowledged them. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the sky, I was exhausted. My hands were raw from gripping the radio. My throat dry from speaking into it. My mind frayed from the unrelenting whispers. I turned the device off finally, letting the silence fall over the outpost. And yet, the silence was different now. The forest didn't feel empty. The shadows were heavier. The branches leaned closer. And even without the radio, I could still hear faint echoes, faint murmurs at the edge of hearing, like the night itself was still speaking to me. I left that night cautiously, flashlight cutting a narrow path through the trees. The clearing seemed larger, longer, more endless than before. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see something following, though I saw nothing. And yet I knew that the presence I had sensed on the radio hadn't left. It had only waited, patient, observing, persistent. When I finally reached my vehicle and started the engine, the hum of it felt loud enough to drown out the echoes, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. I drove slowly, carefully, never letting the road out of sight, always glancing at the tree line. And even then, as the sun began to rise, I could feel it. The forest wasn't empty. The whispers, the static, the distorted laughter, they were still there, just beyond hearing, just beyond sight, waiting for me to return, waiting for me to listen again. I didn't go back that night, or the next. I didn't touch a radio for weeks. But even now, when I hear the faintest crackle, when the wind bends in the wrong direction, I remember the sound of that voice, distorted, waiting, impossible to ignore. And I remember that quiet of the forest, so deep and patient, like it had always been listening. The forest is patient. The radio is patient. And whatever waits beyond the static is patient too. And I know, deep down, it hasn't forgotten me. I thought the first night at the outpost had been bad. I thought the static, the faint whispers, the impossible stillness of the forest were as far as it could go. I was wrong. By the time my second night began, I understood that whatever had reached out through that radio wasn't just interference. It was aware, and it knew me. I arrived at the outpost before sunset, like always, my flashlight in one hand, the radio resting on the table, its cord coiled neatly. I didn't touch it at first. I couldn't. The memory of last night, the distorted voices calling fragments of words, phrases I didn't understand, made my hands shake. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, just the electronics, just my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. The forest had a patience I had never seen before, and the radio wasn't broken. It was a bridge. By the time darkness fell, I had settled into my chair, facing the clearing, the trees silhouetted against the fading light. The first hour passed in silence. Just the wind, the branches, the distant hoot of an owl. But then, faintly, the static returned, almost shy at first. A low, crackling hiss, teasing the edges of hearing. I froze, fingers tightening around the edge of the table. And then I heard it. My name, Ethan. I jumped, nearly dropping the radio. My voice trembled as I said, "Who's there?" The static swelled, filling the small room, swallowing my words. And then it came again, clearer this time. You shouldn't have left the path. I didn't respond immediately. My pulse raced, every muscle in my body tense. How could it know my name? No one else was near this outpost. No one. And yet, the voice, distorted, broken, almost underwater, knew me. It knew details about me that no one could. Things from my childhood. Secrets I hadn't told anyone. I gripped the radio tighter. How do you know that? My words were swallowed by the static. Then the faintest whisper, almost tender in its deliberate distortion. Because we're listening, we've always been listening. The forest outside seemed to shift, or maybe my mind was warping. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the clearing, moving in ways that didn't make sense. Branches tapped against the hut like fingers drumming, soft, patient, insistent. My heart thumped in my chest, louder than the radio, louder than the wind. Every instinct screamed to leave, to throw the radio away, to run until the trees couldn't hold me in their gaze. But I couldn't. The voices returned, almost conversational now. Not fragments, not hints. Full words, full phrases. Secrets I had never shared aloud. Things about my parents, about my first crush. The lie I told on the playground that had haunted me for years. Every word was intimate, precise, delivered through the static as though the radio itself had reached into my memory and pulled them out. I tried to laugh it off, tried to tell myself it was coincidence, some twisted luck of memory and suggestion. But then I heard it again, clearer, closer, almost in the room with me. Do you remember hiding in the attic when you were 7? The smell of rain through the shingles? I remember too. I froze. My fingers loosened their grip, and the radio tilted dangerously, nearly falling. My breathing quickened. I wanted to deny it, to scream, to say that it was impossible. But the voice, no, the presence was patient. It wasn't trying to scare me. Not directly. It was demonstrating, showing me that it knew, that it had always known. I couldn't take my eyes off the radio. The static twisted and pulsed almost like it had a heartbeat. The air around the outpost thickened, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe, and the forest outside, normally comforting in its darkness, felt alive in a way that was wrong. Watching, patient, deliberate. Ethan, do you think you're alone? The question echoed in my mind, though it came through the static. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten. I tried to answer, but my words were hollow, swallowed instantly by the crackling hiss. No, I'm not alone. The response was almost a sigh, a sound too soft to call human. Good, that's important. You must always remember you are not alone. I gripped the edges of the table, knuckles white. I tried to move to step away, but the whispers followed, threading into my mind, tugging at my memories, at my fears, at the parts of me I didn't want anyone to know existed. The radio wasn't just speaking. It was reaching inside, drawing me out, unearthing the hidden pieces of my life, my thoughts, my regrets. I realized then that it wasn't random. The voices weren't chaotic or fractured. They were deliberate, targeted, focused. I wasn't hearing static or random interference. I was hearing an intelligence, aware, patient, observing, choosing the details it shared with me carefully, teasing me, testing me. I tried to shake it off. I left the chair and walked to the window, scanning the darkened clearing, trying to convince myself I wasn't going mad. The trees swayed gently in the wind, shadows stretching across the ground, but nothing moved the way the voices suggested. And yet I could feel it, always there, patient, aware, watching from just beyond sight. The radio crackled again. The voice, clearer, closer, spoke my name once more, followed by another secret I hadn't shared with anyone. Ethan, the drawing you hid under your bed, the one your mother never saw. You thought it was forgotten. It isn't. My stomach twisted. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't argue, couldn't deny it. I had buried it in the corner of my closet, thinking it was gone forever. And yet, here it was, whispered through the static by something I couldn't see, something that shouldn't exist. I stumbled back from the window, backing into the table. The radio crackled again, the sound almost alive now, pulsing in rhythm with my heart. The whispers weren't just fragments anymore. They were deliberate sentences, soft, slow, insidious. You cannot hide from us. We know the things you bury. We remember the things you forget. We've always been here. I gripped the radio tightly, suddenly desperate, almost pleading. What you want from me? My voice was shaking so badly I could barely hear it over the crackling hiss. Silence, then the faintest sigh. Almost a pause long enough to make me think it had gone. And then attention, acknowledgement, understanding. That is all. I sank into the chair again, head in my hands. My mind was spinning, trying to process, trying to hold on to what was real. The forest, the trees, the outpost, they were all unchanged physically. Yet everything felt different. I was being watched. I was being known. And the voices weren't just outside. They were inside me, in my mind, threading into the crevices of memory, brushing against the secrets I thought were mine alone. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't exist in the same way when the radio was speaking. The static ebbed and flowed, the voices weaving around me, whispering fragments, teasing, repeating, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes sighing, always patient. My hands trembled, my knees ached, my chest tightened, and every word they shared, every secret revealed, only pulled me deeper into the sense that I was not just being observed. I was being collected, cataloged, unfolded piece by something patient, precise, inevitable. When the first hint of dawn touched the clearing, the radio finally fell silent. No static, no whispers, nothing. Just the faint hum of the morning wind through the trees. I exhaled shakily, running my hands through my hair, trying to steady myself. The forest looked normal again, but I knew it wasn't. I knew the voices had left traces, little threads in my mind that I couldn't untangle, and I knew they would return. Patient, watching, waiting. Even now, weeks later, I catch myself flinching at static, at the hiss of a radio, at the faintest whisper in the wind. The forest may be miles away, but the voices remember me. They know me, and they are patient. I don't know what they want yet. Maybe they never will. But I know I will hear them again. And when I do, I won't be able to pretend I'm alone. Not ever again. The forest didn't stay still. Not that I had ever expected it to, really. But that night it shifted in ways I couldn't explain. Trees that had been in one place the hour before now seemed to loom closer, leaning toward me, their branches scraping the sky like fingers. Shadows pulled differently on the ground, elongating, twisting, as if the very earth were breathing, shaping itself around me. I could feel it in my bones before I even realized it. I wasn't just in the forest. I was inside something alive. I had the radio with me, clutched like a lifeline, though I wasn't sure it was helping me survive or just feeding the presence. The static returned first, a low hiss under the wind, a whisper beneath the branches, and then the voice, clearer this time, closer, speaking directly to me, not just through the static. Ethan, I froze, every nerve screaming, heart hammering so loud, I thought it might burst. Who's there? I asked, though I knew the forest couldn't answer. The radio crackled, and then every step, every breath we see. I shivered. My hands gripped the device tighter, knuckles white. The shadows moved with a purpose now, curling and stretching in the corners of my vision. It wasn't subtle. The forest itself seemed to react to my fear, shaping the darkness around me, drawing me in, molding the world to remind me that I was being watched. I tried to move forward, to walk toward the small clearing where my outpost stood, but the trees shifted with every step, closing the path, bending the shadows in the hallways I hadn't noticed before. The forest wasn't just alive. It was aware, and it was patient. The radio pulsed in my hands, faintly vibrating as though alive. A heartbeat synced to mine. I held it closer, hoping for clarity, for direction. Do you remember the path you took yesterday, the one you thought was safe? I swallowed hard. My voice trembled. Why, yes. Static. A hiss, low and insistent, almost like a breath in my ear. Then, safe, never alone. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a root, but the forest seemed to move with me, roots twisting subtly beneath the soil as though reaching for me, guiding me toward some destination I couldn't see. Every step I tried to take away from the noise, from the voice, felt wrong. The trees pressed closer, the shadows thickened, and the radio hummed louder, pulsing in my hands like a warning or a command. I thought about turning off the radio. I really did. But when I lifted the switch, the static grew louder, the voice warping, stretching into distorted syllables that clawed at my mind. I couldn't escape. It wasn't just the forest that held me. It was the signal itself, and it had learned me, understood me, watching my every move, knowing when fear would grip me strongest and amplifying it. I stumbled to a small hollow in the forest floor, sitting against the trunk of a massive oak, shaking, trying to catch my breath. The radio vibrated against my leg, almost warm, almost alive, the hiss constant and insistent. And then the voice spoke again, slower, deliberate. Don't move or you'll be lost. I couldn't think straight. I tried to tell myself it was interference, that the night had just gotten to me, that my mind was unraveling from exhaustion and fear. But I knew it wasn't just that. The forest shifted in response to me. Shadows leaned in, edges curling toward me, and the wind whispered my name in ways that weren't natural. I closed my eyes for a moment, hoping that by shutting out the visual, I could shut out the fear. The whispering didn't stop. It threaded through my mind, threading through memory, brushing at secrets I had never spoken aloud. I could feel it probing, persistent, patient, taking my thoughts as if they were leaves to be collected. When I opened my eyes again, the forest was different. The path I had taken countless times to reach the clearing now stretched impossibly, branches interlocking overhead to form a tunnel of darkness. And somewhere within it, I felt the presence of something larger, moving slowly, deliberately, almost following the rhythm of my pulse. The radio hissed again, this time with a laughter layered underneath the static. Not human, not friendly, but deliberate, low and patient. I felt it more than heard it, vibrating through my chest, through my hands, through the air around me. Ethan, do you think you can hide from us? Do you think the trees will protect you? I swallowed, voice trembling. I don't want to be here. Static, then, here. You're always here. We are always here. Watching. I tried to stand, but the forest floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. Roots that had been lying dormant now rose, curling subtly as if alive. Shadows pooled unnaturally beneath the trees, stretching and twisting at the edges of my vision. I realized then that the forest wasn't just aware. It was directing me, shaping the space itself, bending reality subtly to keep me inside, to keep me close to the signal, to whatever it wanted me to witness. I ran, or thought I ran, though the path changed with each step. The trees moved closer, the shadows thickened, and the radio pulsed constantly in my hands, vibrating with a life of its own. I could hear fragments now, full phrases whispered through the static, phrases I couldn't escape. Every secret, every fear, we know, we watch. I stumbled into a clearing I didn't recognize. Moonlight barely reached the ground, thin and cold. The radio pulsed, almost impatient, and the voice returned deliberate, low, echoing through the clearing. Do you see now? You are never alone. Not here, not anywhere. I sank to my knees, chest heaving. My hands gripped the radio, knuckles white. The static grew louder, almost filling the entire clearing, the hiss weaving into the wind, threading into my mind. Shadows shifted around me, closer, more deliberate, curling in ways that made no natural sense. The forest had become a room, and the trees were walls, the shadows curtains, and I was trapped inside. I tried to call for help. My voice trembled as I whispered into the radio, "Please, someone answer me." Static, a whisper, my name, followed by a secret only I knew, something I had hidden deep, never shared. My stomach twisted, my pulse raced, my hands shook. I realized then that the signal wasn't just communicating. It was alive. It was patient. It had memory. And it was feeding on my recognition, my fear, my vulnerability. I tried to stand again, but the shadows seemed to curl closer, and the trees seemed to lean, subtle and deliberate, guiding me, forcing me toward the center of the clearing. The radio hummed, vibrating, pulsing, alive. I understood finally that it wasn't just a forest that was alive. The signal itself was aware, watching, patient, malevolent. I sank back, exhausted, chest heaving. The whispers continued, weaving into my mind, threading through memories I'd buried, reminding me of every secret, every lie, every fear I thought I could hide. I realized, in that moment, that the forest and the signal were the same thing. The trees moved, but only to reveal what had always been there, the awareness that had waited, patient, for me to arrive. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't exist when the signal spoke. Every whisper, every crackle, every distorted fragment of sound drew me deeper, threading into my thoughts, shaping my perception. I could no longer tell where the forest ended and the presence began. The shadows, the static, the trees. They were one, patient, deliberate, insistent. By the time dawn began to bleed through the canopy, the whispers faded slightly, leaving only the hum of the radio and the subtle, pulsing awareness in the trees. I sank against the trunk of a tree, shivering, exhausted beyond measure. The forest looked natural again, Moonlight fading, shadows softening. But I knew better. I knew that the signal hadn't left. The trees hadn't stopped moving. The presence hadn't stopped watching. It had only withdrawn for the moment, patient as ever, waiting for the next night, the next static, the next whisper that would pull me back into its awareness. I left the clearing slowly, radio in hand, every step measured, every shadow noted. The forest followed me, not physically, not obviously, but in ways I could feel. The pulse of the signal lingered in my chest. The memory of the whispers threaded through my thoughts. And I understood, finally, that I could never truly escape. Not the forest, not the signal, not the awareness that had claimed me, if only in part that night. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel it. The static, the pulse, the patient observation. It is waiting, always patient, always watching, always moving just behind my vision, behind my thoughts, behind the fragile barrier of reality I cling to, and I know without a doubt that it remembers me. I never thought a job at a roadside motel would make me feel like I was disappearing. But here I am, night after night, behind the desk with nothing but a hum of flickering fluorescent lights and the occasional rumble of a car on the highway. The motel has been here longer than anyone can remember. Some people say it's been abandoned more times than it's been open, but somehow it always finds someone desperate enough to run it. Tonight, that someone is me. The lobby smells faintly of bleach and old carpet, a scent that never leaves no matter how many times I scrub the counters. A stack of registration forms sits to my left, edges curling like the pages of an old diary, and the phone sits to my right, silently daring someone to call. Mostly it doesn't. Nights here are slow. They're quiet. Too quiet. The first guest arrived around 10. An older man in a dark trench coat that looked like it had seen 100 winters. His hair was thin, gray at the temples, and his eyes were fixed somewhere beyond the walls of the lobby. He didn't make small talk, just handed me a crumpled bill, the change clinking into my hand like a warning. "Room 3, he said. His voice was dry, like paper burning. I watched him walk down the narrow hallway, the light from the ceiling bouncing off the pale yellow walls. He paused in front of his door, as if listening for something, and then went inside. The lock clicked behind him, final and certain. I should have checked the room later. I didn't. Hours passed. Another guest came in around midnight. A young woman, tall, thin, with a kind of haunted look that made me want to ask if she was okay. But I didn't. I never do. She said her name was Mary Ann. She requested a room at the end of the hall. Room 7. Her suitcase was old and battered, the corners taped over, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like someone was following her. I told her the room was fine. She nodded and walked past me without another word. The odd thing about this place is that sometimes I think I see the same people over and over, but the registration log says otherwise. After Mary Ann, there was a middle-aged man, suit, tie, briefcase, just passing through. He said, "Room 5. Then a pair of kids no older than 12 with their mother, room 2. And with each guest, I felt it, that subtle, creeping sense that something wasn't right. It was after 3 when I noticed him again, the older man from room 3. He was sitting in the lobby, though I was sure he hadn't been there before. He didn't move when I approached, just sat, hands folded, staring at the floor. "You're not supposed to be down here," I said. My voice sounded louder than I expected. He didn't respond. I leaned on the counter, trying to get a better look. His eyes flicked toward me for a brief second, and in them, I saw nothing but a hollow patience, like someone who had been waiting for centuries. "Room 3, he finally said, almost whispering, though the words were perfectly clear. I swallowed. "Yes, that's your room." He nodded slowly, deliberately, and then stood up. His coat brushed against the floor, and I could hear the faint scrape of leather shoes on tile. I stepped aside, expecting him to walk past me, but instead he stopped halfway, looked at the clock above the door, and then back at me. "Time passes differently here," he said. I laughed nervously. "Yeah, sure. You get used to the night shift." But he didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He simply turned and walked toward the elevator. My stomach sank. Something about him was wrong, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried to shake it off. I had long since learned that fear here is subtle. It creeps in, whispers in your ear, lingers at the edge of your vision. I started my usual rounds, checking rooms, making sure doors were locked, glancing into the empty corridors that stretched endlessly. Though in truth the motel isn't that big. Something about it feels larger at night. That's when I noticed it. Room 7, Mary Ann's room. The door was slightly ajar. My heart skipped. I hadn't seen her leave, and the light inside was dim, flickering like a dying candle. I knocked softly. No response. I pushed the door open. The room looked normal. Her suitcase was open, clothes folded neatly, but there was no sign of her. The bed was made. Nothing moved. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from the shadows. I stepped back, closed the door, and tried to convince myself I was imagining things. I returned to the lobby, and that's when I noticed the little details that never appear in the daylight. The clock seemed slower than it should, though I had checked it a dozen times before. The lights hummed with a low, almost vocal vibration, like the building itself was breathing. And in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw figures in the hallways. People standing there, waiting, but when I turned, they were gone. I started checking the registration log. That's when it became impossible to ignore. Some of the guests, Mary Ann, the kids, the older man, they had been listed for weeks. Weeks. Some even months. And yet, every night, they appeared like it was their first day. The dates didn't add up. The numbers didn't make sense. I called the front desk of the corporate office. No one answered. Just a recording, looping over and over, telling me to hold. I hung up. No one would help me. Not here. Not ever. The older man returned to the lobby around 4:15 a.m., sitting in the same spot as before. Only this time, he had company, a young man in a gray hoodie, standing silently behind him. Their presence made the air heavy, and I could feel it pressing against my chest. "You see them too," the older man said, turning toward me. "I see some guests," I stammered. "They don't leave. They can't. And neither can you, if you don't pay attention." I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words caught in my throat. My hands were cold. My eyes darted toward the hallways, toward rooms that seemed to stretch further than they should. They check in. They never check out. Some forget why they came. Some never remember who they are. But they stay. And the night feeds on that. I stepped back. "What were you talking about?" He smiled then. A slow, patient, knowing smile that made my stomach churn. "You'll see." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat behind the desk, watching the clock, the flickering lights, the endless shadows that seemed to reach toward me. Every now and then, a figure appeared in the hall, always silent, always still. The elevator dinged when no one was inside. The phone rang, but when I picked up, there was only breathing on the other end, long, slow, and unhuman. By morning, the lobby felt different. The air was heavier, thicker. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion. The night always feels longer than it should, after all. But when I checked the rooms, room 3 was empty. Room 7 had Mary Ann's suitcase closed neatly again. The kids' room, empty. Everything was as it should be, or at least, as the motel wanted me to believe. I left my post for a few minutes, walked the halls, checked the doors. No one was there, and yet I could still feel them, watching, waiting, smiling just beyond the corner of my vision. I came back to the desk, sank into the chair, and realized I had stopped breathing without noticing. The older man was gone. The young man, too. The lobby was silent, and the fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous tune. But I knew they'd return. I always knew. And I knew something else, too. Once you start noticing, once you start seeing, there's no going back. The night claims you, slowly, patiently. And I had checked in. The bell on the door jingled. A new guest, or maybe the same one. I didn't care to look. I signed the form, handed over the keys, and smiled when I should have felt fear. Only, inside I was already gone. The motel waits. Always. And I am just a night clerk who watches. I thought I understood the motel. I thought I knew its rhythms, the way the shadows leaned against the walls, the way the lights flickered just enough to make you question whether you'd seen something or imagined it. But that night, I learned I didn't know anything at all. It started in room 4. I had been sent to fix a leaky faucet, or at least that's what the maintenance note said. The hallway smelled like damp carpet and mildew, and the light overhead hummed a low, tired note. I fumbled for the key, turned in the lock, and the door swung open with a soft creak. The room looked ordinary at first glance. Faded wallpaper curling at the corners, a small desk with a lamp, a bed neatly made as if no one had slept in it for decades. But when I glanced up, I saw the mirror above the dresser. It was clean, polished, perfect, and I saw something that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't me, not entirely. My reflection moved, sure, but it lagged behind, like it was a frame off in a bad film. When I raised my hand, it raised too, but slower. Its eyes lingered on mine a moment too long, darker, colder, like it was staring into something I wasn't ready to face. I stumbled back, heart hammering. No, that's not possible, I muttered, but it was. The reflection smiled at me when I didn't. A small, cruel curl of the lips, mocking. I stepped closer, desperate to prove it was just a trick of the light. Maybe a stain on the glass. But the air around the mirror felt thick, sticky. My hand reached out, trembling, and as it neared the surface, I saw the room behind the reflection change. The bed was empty, but in the mirror, a figure sat on it. A woman. Her hair was long, dark, tangled, and she rocked slowly, back and forth, whispering words I couldn't catch. Her head tilted unnaturally, jerking in small, quick movements, and she stared at me through the glass with eyes that weren't hers. They were mine. I jerked back, gasping. My reflection, or whatever it was, laughed, a dry, hollow sound, echoing in the room even though the walls were bare. I wanted to leave. I wanted to slam the door, run down the hallway, call someone, but my legs felt heavy, glued to the floor, and then I saw it, another reflection, in the small bathroom mirror across the room. The faucet dripped, the light flickered, and in that mirror, the ceiling peeled like skin, the walls melted into shadows, and I saw faces press against the glass from the other side. Not real faces, faces made of dark smears, eyes blinking slowly, mouths opening as if screaming, but no sound came. I stumbled toward the bathroom, heart racing, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the faucet. I splashed water on my face, hoping it would clear the image, but when I looked up again, the faces were closer. They weren't behind me. They were inside the glass, moving, writhing, watching. I ran back into the main room and lunged at the dresser mirror. I tried to cover it, tried to rip it off the wall, but it was like the glass had weight beyond its size, like it was holding itself together with something alive inside. Then I noticed the details that made my blood run cold. The reflection didn't just mimic me. It changed. It exaggerated my fears, my regrets. My own eyes in the glass looked older, tired in a way I wasn't yet. My mouth, when I opened it to scream, stretched wider than it should have, the corners pulling toward my ears. My hands twisted, fingers bending at impossible angles. And it wasn't just me. I saw everything I feared reflected back. The first motel guest, the old man from room 3, looming behind me with that same patient smile. Marianne, the girl from room 7, her head cocked unnaturally, whispering words I couldn't understand, hands reaching toward me even though she stood nowhere in the room. I sank to the floor, shaking, trying to ignore the reflections, but they wouldn't let me. The room seemed to pulse, like the walls themselves were breathing, and every surface became a mirror. The dresser, the window, even the polished metal of the lamp reflected horrors that weren't there, or at least shouldn't have been. I remembered the stories, the things the night shift always whispered when no one else could hear, about the mirrors, about the motel watching you back, about the things that crawl into your reflection and wait. I had laughed when I first heard it. I had scoffed. Now I knew. Time began to stretch, elastic and cruel. Seconds felt like hours. My reflection grew bolder, stepping closer, moving independently. Its mouth opened wider, and I could swear I heard it speak, whispering the darkest truths I had buried deep inside. "You're not safe," it said. My breath hitched. "Who? What are you?" The reflection didn't answer. It only smiled, and then it spoke without moving its lips, words forming in my mind instead of my ears. "You stay. You watch. You remember. You cannot leave." The air grew colder. The room darkened. Shadows pulled in corners and along the edges of my vision. And then I noticed the smaller details, the things that made my skin crawl with a slow, unrelenting fear. The scratches on the wall that hadn't been there before, words etched in frantic, almost illegible handwriting. "Leave, don't look, don't forget." I couldn't look away. My reflection had my body, but it moved with a rhythm I didn't know. It was me and not me at the same time, like the motel had taken the essence of my fears and pressed them into glass. Every movement, every twitch of its eyes mirrored something I had buried. Regrets, mistakes, the shame I tried to hide. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I had no sense of time. Every glance at the mirror warped reality, showing things that shouldn't exist. My reflection smiled again, its eyes filled with knowledge, cruelty, and a kind of patience that was far older than me. I tried to leave. I really did. I ran for the door, hands fumbled with the lock. But when I turned the handle, the hallway stretched. Room 4's door was no longer there. Or maybe it was. But the corridor twisted like a living thing, walls breathing in and out, stretching away from me. Every exit vanished in reflection and shadow. And then I realized, the motel doesn't want you to leave. Not once it knows you. Not once it has shown you yourself. I sank to the floor, back against the dresser. My reflection crouched with me, tilting its head, studying. And I realized it was learning. Learning me. Learning my fears. Learning my weaknesses. I remember the first scream I let out. It wasn't loud, not really. It didn't echo through the building. It came out as a low, wet gasp, swallowed quickly by the dark corners. And yet the reflection smiled wider, approving. It whispered again, this time a single word that echoed in my chest rather than my ears. "Stay." The room began to shift. The bed twisted. The walls groaned. The ceiling peeled back like skin. Shadows stretched out, forming hands, faces, shapes that whispered all my forgotten sins and regrets. I tried to cover my eyes. I tried to scream. But the mirrors, oh, the mirrors, they were everywhere. I realized then that the motel doesn't just hold people, it holds fears. It holds the things you hope will disappear if you pretend they don't exist. And when the night is quiet, it shows them to you. Shows you yourself stripped bare and helpless. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes? Hours? Days? I've lost track. But when the lights flickered weakly at dawn, I opened my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, the mirrors were normal. Just glass. Just reflections. Just me. But I knew it was a lie. The motel hadn't released me. It had only paused. The mirrors, I knew, were still watching, still learning, waiting for the night to return, for me to be alone again. And I would be. I always am. I left room 4, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Every shadow seemed a little too deep. Every reflection in the hall, window glass, polished metal, even the tiny badge on my uniform, carried a glimpse of that other me, the me that wasn't real. Back at the desk, I stared at the lobby mirror. My hand shook as I traced the edges with my fingers, trying to tell myself it was safe, that it was just a reflection. But in the corner of my vision, I saw a flicker. My reflection smiled at me, and I knew it was still learning. It was still waiting, and the motel always wins. Room 6 had a reputation. Everyone in town knew it, though no one wanted to admit it out loud. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was haunted. Some people whispered that if you stayed there too long, you didn't come back the same. I never believed any of it. At least, I told myself I didn't. But the night I finally entered, I understood that fear doesn't need belief. Fear is alive whether you acknowledge it or not. It was around 2 in the morning when the front desk phone rang. The bell in the lobby jingled. echoing too loudly in the empty motel. I looked at the register, expecting a mistake. No one had checked in for room 6 in weeks. That alone was strange. But the phone kept ringing, shrill and insistent, until I picked up, voice shaking more than I realized. Hello. Silence. Just a faint, almost imperceptible breathing. Slow, steady, like someone was right next to me. I swallowed hard. Hello. I tried again. Still nothing but the quiet rasp of breath. I left the desk, key in hand. The hallway smelled like varnish and dust, the walls humming faintly under the weight of darkness. Room 6 sat halfway down the hall, door peeling, paint chipped, lock rusted. It was unassuming in daylight, but at night it looked like something waiting to swallow me whole. I hesitated, gripping the key so tightly that my knuckles went white. My mind raced with stories I'd heard, the ones whispered by old clerks who had quit without explanation. But this wasn't stories. This was real. My fingers trembled as I slid the key into the lock. It turned with jarring click, the sound echoing down the empty corridor like a gunshot. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The room was small like all the others, but the air hit me first, thick, heavy, and cold. It smelled faintly metallic like iron and old blood, though I couldn't be sure if it was real or just the imagination straining at the dark corners. The bed was made perfectly neat, but the blanket seemed heavier than it should, like it had weight beyond cloth. The lamp flickered, casting long, uneven shadows across the walls. And then I heard it, a faint, deliberate breathing. Not my own. I froze, heart hammering, palms slick with sweat. The sound came from somewhere in a room, close, yet impossible to locate. Behind me? Under the bed? In the closet? My eyes darted around, but the shadows seemed to shift with me, stretching and shrinking as if the room itself was alive. Hello? My voice was small, swallowed immediately by the darkness. The breathing paused, then started again, slower this time, deliberate, almost playful. I felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing on me, something just beyond the edge of vision, and I realized with a sinking certainty that the room was watching. I took a step forward, then another. Each movement felt heavy, as if the floor itself resisted me. My flashlight flickered in my grip. When it settled, I saw the dresser, mirror cracked diagonally across the surface. Nothing reflected in it but the room, or maybe that wasn't true. For a brief instant, I thought I saw someone standing behind me, just a silhouette, tall and thin, tilting its head in curiosity. I spun around. Nothing. I told myself it was my imagination. It had to be. I had been working nights long enough to know that the mind played tricks when the dark pressed too close. But the room felt wrong. Alive. I could feel in the way the shadows moved, in the way the air seemed to thicken as I breathed. I approached the bed. My reflection in the cracked mirror flickered again. Something crouched there. It wasn't human. Or maybe it was, but wrong in ways I couldn't understand. Limbs bent at impossible angles. Its head tilted too far, and its eyes, my own eyes, staring back, wide with fear. I swallowed, heart hammering so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I leaned down, just to look under the bed, just to see if the sound came from there. Nothing. The breathing continued, faint, slow, almost mocking. It came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I could feel it against my neck, against my chest, as if someone or something had drawn too close in the dark. My hands shook as I pulled back, leaning against the bed for support. I remembered the old stories. Guests who had stayed in room 6 never left unchanged. Some went mad, some disappeared, and the ones who came back weren't quite themselves. I laughed nervously, but it felt hollow. I knew the laughter had no meaning. The lamp flickered again, and I saw a movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow detached itself from the wall, thin and stretched, almost liquid in the way it moved. I spun, flashlight trembling, and the shadow vanished. But the feeling lingered, like heat on my skin where nothing should be. Then I noticed the little things. The scratches on the floorboards, faint, as if claws had raked a month ago. The wallpaper had small tears that looked like mouths, opening just a fraction, just enough for me to imagine screams pressing through. My stomach churned, and I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breath steady, and then the breathing changed. Faster now, closer. I could feel it in my chest, shaking me from the inside. It wasn't steady anymore. It was patient teasing. I knew it was laughing without sound. I wanted to leave, but my feet refused. Something held me there, in the center of the room, watching, waiting. The shadows move again, subtle, almost graceful. I thought I saw shapes forming. Faces press against walls that weren't there before, bodies contorted in unnatural ways, eyes blinking slowly in the darkness. My flashlight flickered and died. I was plunged into black. Absolute, complete. My own heartbeat sounded deafening. I could feel the breathing now, right behind me, closer. "You shouldn't be here," a voice whispered, not from the walls, not from the shadows, but in my head. A voice that sounded like mine, and yet wasn't. I spun, hands clawing at the darkness, trying to find the source. Nothing. The room was silent, except for the faint, deliberate rhythm of breath. I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. The room pressed in on me. The air was thick, and I could feel shapes brushing against my skin, barely tangible, teasing me. I forced myself to look around. The shadows shifted. The walls pulsed. The ceiling seemed to breathe with the room. And then I saw it. A figure sitting in the corner, where no light could reach, head tilted, eyes glowing faintly. Its mouth opened, and I could hear words form without sound, pressing into my mind. "You stay. You always stay." I screamed, a raw, ragged sound swallowed by the dark. The figure didn't move. It just watched, patient, infinite. And I realized I couldn't run. I couldn't fight. Room 6 held me already. Minutes or hours passed. I don't know. Time doesn't exist there. Only the breathing. Only the shadows. Only the feeling of eyes, countless and unseen, staring into the deepest parts of me. I thought of running, of calling for help, of anything to escape. But I knew, deep down, that the room wouldn't let me leave. Not until it was done. I remembered the guests. The old man from room 3. Mary Ann. The children. I had seen their shadows, their presences in fleeting moments. And now I understood they were all like me, trapped, observed, slowly consumed by the motel's dark patience. Room 6 didn't just keep you inside. It showed you yourself stripped bare. Every fear, every regret, every moment you wanted to forget. I tried to focus on the floorboards, on something real. But the shadows grew bolder, moving independently, twisting in ways that no human limb could manage. Shapes pressed against me, brushing my skin, whispering all the things I tried to hide from myself. And the breathing, it became my own, indistinguishable from theirs. I realized then that fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, waiting until you've forgotten what day it is, forgotten who you are. I could feel it in my bones, in the trembling of my fingers, in the wetness of my palms. And I knew that if I stayed long enough, I would forget. The room shifted again. The bed moved closer. The walls leaned in. I could feel the corners tightening, pulling me toward the darkness, toward the shadow in the corner. Its glowing eyes never left me. And then, just as suddenly everything stilled, the breathing slowed. The shadows froze. Silence pressed down so hard, I thought I would crack. I crawled to the door, fumbling with the lock, key shaking in my grip. It turned with a metallic click, the sound deafening in the quiet. I threw the door open and ran down the hall, not stopping until the lobby came into view. The night clerk's desk felt like a sanctuary, though I knew it wasn't. The motel didn't release its hold that easily. I leaned against it, gasping, eyes darting toward room 6. The door sat there, innocuous, ordinary, as if nothing had happened. But I knew it had, and I knew it hadn't. I would never forget the breathing, the watching, the shadow in the corner. Room 6 had seen me. It had learned me, and I was already part of it. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that as soon as I opened the folder labeled guest records, I was inviting trouble. But curiosity has a weight all its own, heavier than fear, and it presses down until you have no choice but to obey. It started when I was organizing the old filing cabinet in the back office. Dust coated every surface, the kind that scratches your throat and leaves a thin film on your skin. Most of the files were decades old, brittle and curling at the edges, filled with handwritten names and dates that no one alive remembers. But one drawer caught my eye. It wasn't labeled, just a simple metal plate that read, "Guests, all years." I pulled it open and the smell hit me first. Musty old paper, with the faint copper tang of rusted staples. My hands trembled slightly as I leafed through the pages. At first, it was just names I recognized from the recent register. Marianne, the old man from room 3, the kids in room 2. But then I saw the dates. Marianne, room 7. Checked in 1978. Checked out never. I blinked. That couldn't be right. My memory is sharp enough to remember a guest who arrived last week, let alone one from over 40 years ago. I checked the current system, typing her name in. There she was. Room 7. Checked in last night. Same woman. Same haunted look. I felt the air shift. The office suddenly seemed colder, smaller. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights as if they were murmuring warnings I wasn't ready to hear. I flipped through more records. Each page was worse than the last. Names I recognized. Faces I had seen on the register. All marked as missing, deceased, or simply unknown, with check-in dates stretching back decades. And yet, they were still here, appearing nightly in the current system, as alive as the day they supposedly vanished. I slammed the folder shut, hard hammering, but something pulled me back. I had to know. I had to see the full list. The names were endless. A man in room 3 who had disappeared in 1962. 2 children in room 2 listed as missing since 1985. Even the old man, the one who always showed up in the lobby silently observing me. He had checked in 50 years ago and never left. I leaned back in my chair, running my hands over my face. I tried to think rationally. Maybe the system had errors. Maybe the old records hadn't been updated. But my gut told me it wasn't that simple. This motel didn't make mistakes. It doesn't need to. I checked the current log again. Names repeated nightly. Guests that should have been gone long ago were still here. And in some cases, their check-in dates seemed to reset, starting over every night, as if the motel had no memory of them leaving at all. I thought of the shadows I'd seen, the breathing in room 6, the mirrors that showed things that weren't there. It all made sense now, in a way that chilled me to my core. This place doesn't just house travelers. It keeps them, and in keeping them, it erases a line between past and present. I realized with a sinking feeling that I was part of it too. Every night I spent here, every record I touched, every name I saw, I was being pulled into the same cycle. The motel doesn't just hold the lost. It absorbs the living, folds them into its endless roster, waits until they become ghosts in the system, just like the others. I stood and walked to the lobby, feeling the weight of all those missing people pressing down on me. I imagined them walking the halls, silent, unseen. Room 6, room 7, room 3, they never left. The air around me was thick, as if the building itself was inhaling my fear, drawing it into the walls, storing it for later. I checked the computer again. There was a folder labeled special cases. I hesitated. Something told me not to open it, that whatever was inside would make the rest of the files look tame. But my curiosity was relentless. Inside, I found handwritten notes and scanned documents. Everything the motel had kept about guests who were never supposed to exist in the present. Names, dates, photographs, small observations. Quiet, watches the hall, avoids mirrors, always leaves a light on. Some of the notes were decades old. Others were recent. And some overlapped. The same person described in 1972 and in 2025, in the same handwriting, as if time had no meaning here. I sat down, trying to absorb it all. My mind raced. Every guest I had ever seen at the desk, every fleeting shadow, every whisper breath in the hall, it all connected now. They weren't wandering, lost in time by accident. They were here because the motel wanted them here. And the system, this endless digital reflection of its past, was proof. Guests who vanished decades ago were still present tonight, still checking in, still interacting with me in ways I could barely comprehend. The motel had folded time itself into its walls. I thought about the old man from room 3. 50 years of watching, silent, patient. I remembered Mary Ann, head tilting in impossible ways, always whispering just out of reach. I thought of the children, their eyes too old for their bodies, staring at nothing, smiling at the wrong moments. All of them were anchored to this place by a force I couldn't name, a presence that didn't need explanation. I heard a soft noise then, a shuffle from the hallway. My pulse quickened. I looked up from the screen. The lobby was empty, but I could feel it. The presence. Watching. Waiting. A chill ran down my spine. I went to the window behind the desk and peered into the lot. Nothing moved. Just the empty parking spaces and the dull light from the single street lamp. But I could feel them. Every name on that list was more than a record. They were echoes, lingering in the air, pressing close, reminding me that this motel doesn't release its guests. Not ever. I returned to the computer and checked the main registry. Each name clicked into place. Each date confirmed. And I noticed something new. Some entries weren't just repeated. They were active. The old man from room 3 had a new charge posted for last night. Mary Ann had a note about housekeeping. Even the children had an entry for a midnight snack request. It was as if the motel treated them like current, living guests, even though they shouldn't exist. I leaned back, trying to understand it. How could a place hold so many people, bending reality, time, and memory around them? I realized slowly with horror that the motel itself was a living record. It didn't just house travelers. It cataloged them, maintained them, kept their presence active for reasons I couldn't yet grasp. And me? I was just a clerk, a witness, someone who signs the forms, watches the halls, and records the names. Every night I worked, I became part of that system, part of the list. One day I might vanish too. One day, decades from now, a clerk might find my name in a brittle folder, see my photo in the archives, and wonder how I had stayed so long without leaving. The thought made my stomach churn. I slammed the laptop shut, but the screen's glow lingered in my vision. I could see the names flickering, moving, repeating. Every time I blinked, a new record appeared. A guest from 50 years ago, smiling in the register. A child who should be grown, still requesting the same room. A man who disappeared decades ago, checking in again. I tried to step back, breathe, ground myself, but the weight of it pressed down. The motel wasn't just a building. It was a living ledger, a place where time doesn't pass, where present is eternal, and where the lost become permanent entries. I thought of room 6, the breathing, the shadows, the mirrors. It all made sense now. Room 6 wasn't cursed in the usual way. It was a microcosm of the motel itself, a place where the rules bent, where presence and absence merged, and where fear was cataloged as carefully as a guest's name. I thought of the old man again, and something in me froze. He knew. He always knew. I could see it in his patient stare, in the way he moved through the halls. He had understood the system long before I ever had, long before I even started this job. And now, I understood why he never left. The motel had claimed him, and in doing so, had made him part of its endless list. I closed the drawer containing the old records. The filing cabinet now felt heavier, as if it carried more than paper, more than names. It carried the weight of decades of vanished lives, of people who shouldn't exist but did. I returned to the front desk. The lobby was quiet, almost unbearably so. The clock ticked normally, or at least, I think it did. I tried to ignore the sensation that the walls were watching, that shadows flickered where they shouldn't, but I knew better. I had seen the records. I had seen the proof. Every guest I had ever interacted with, every fleeting shadow, every whisper breath in the hall, it all connected to the same truth. The motel doesn't just host travelers. It keeps them. It preserves them. And it watches endlessly as the world outside continues, unaware of what lies inside. And me, I sit at this desk, signing forms, checking names, updating records. I am the keeper of the list, the witness to the impossible, the one who watches the guests who cannot leave. I know in my bones that one day I will be part of the ledger too. And when that happens, the motel will smile, patient, infinite, and simply add another name to the file. I thought I had grown used to the motel. I thought I understood the shadows, the whispers, the way the hallways stretched like they had a mind of their own. I was wrong. I always had been wrong. That night, it all came together. The records, the mirrors, the breathing in room 6. But it didn't prepare me for what happened when the night finally ended. Or at least when I thought it had. It started quietly, as most horrors do. The lobby was empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, casting long, trembling shadows. I went through my usual closing routine, checking the rooms, noting the absent guests, turning off the machines, making sure the doors were locked. But everything felt different. The air was thick, heavier than usual, like it had substance, like it could hold you down if it wanted. I walked the hallways slowly, keyring jingling softly against my belt. Each step echoed a little too long, carrying my own footsteps forward and backward at the same time, like the walls were playing tricks. My reflection in the few remaining polished surfaces flickered, sometimes showing me correctly, sometimes wrongly. Room 6. I found myself standing in front of it, key trembling in my hand. I had thought I left the fear behind, thought the shadows and whispers would be confined to the night. But the motel doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. It waits, always waits. The door was cracked open just slightly. A sliver of darkness moved inside. I stepped closer, heart hammering, and I heard it. Soft, deliberate breathing. Not my own, not anyone I could see. It came from inside the room, behind walls that weren't there, or maybe from under the floorboards. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. I pushed the door open. The room was small, quiet, seemingly normal, but the moment I stepped in, I knew it wasn't. The walls weren't static. They shifted imperceptibly, curling and leaning closer like they were alive. I tried to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. I didn't touch it. I didn't hear it. It just closed. The air was thick, humid, impossible to breathe easily. The bed seemed closer, larger, almost pressing against me. The light flickered, stretched and twisted, shadows moving independently, gathering in corners that hadn't existed seconds ago. And the breathing, it was closer now, directly behind me, though nothing was there. I spun, flashlight shaking, but the beam caught only empty air. A whisper grazed my ear, slow and deliberate. "You can't leave." I stumbled back. What? Who's there? Silence. But the breathing continued, slow, deliberate. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating in my bones. I pressed my back against the wall, hands trembling, trying to remind myself this was a motel, a building, walls and doors and furniture. Nothing supernatural existed. I told myself that, over and over. But the room didn't listen. The walls shifted again. I swear they moved closer, subtly at first, then with intent. Corners stretching inward, ceilings lowering, the floor sloping under my feet like a living thing. I felt it, the pressure, the weight, the inevitability of it. The motel wasn't just haunted. It was patient, deliberate, and it wanted me. I glanced at the mirror. My reflection wasn't mine. My face was elongated, mouth stretched in a silent scream. My eyes were hollow, filled with everything I feared. I raised a hand. The reflection didn't follow exactly, moving a moment behind, twisting, reaching toward me with fingers that bent at unnatural angles. I backed away. The walls groaned softly, a subtle vibration that resonated with my own heartbeat. The shadows pulled in the corners, forming shapes I recognized or thought I recognized. Faces of guests who had vanished decades ago, staring, smiling, whispering just out of comprehension. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to shut it all out. The room pulsed, breathing alive. I could hear the faint scratching of nails against walls, the soft shuffle of feet that didn't belong to anyone. My skin crawled. I remembered the old man, Marianne, the children. I had seen their shadows, their presence, and now I felt them here, pressing close, learning me. I ran to the door, throwing my weight against it. Nothing. It didn't budge. I tried the windows. They were locked, nailed shut, unyielding. Panic rose in me, thick and suffocating. My breaths came in shallow, ragged gasps. And then I realized the room was closing in, slowly, inexorably pressing, leaning, folding. The corners became sharper, the ceiling closer, the air tighter. I could feel the floor beneath me twist. My feet slipped as if the room itself was tilting, bending reality to its will. My flashlight fell, bouncing across the walls, casting shadows that screamed, reaching for me. I dove toward it, grabbed it, and swung it wildly, trying to ward off shapes that had no substance, shapes that pressed and whispered in my mind. The breathing was everywhere now. It wasn't behind me. It wasn't under the bed. It was me. It was the walls, the shadows, the air itself. It pressed against my chest, rattled my skull, rattled my soul. I sank to the floor, hugging my knees, rocking slightly. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't run. I realized slowly with a sick certainty that I was trapped, not by doors, not by walls, by the motel itself, by the sum of all the lost and the vanished and the patients who had become records, and by the part of me that now belonged to it. Time fractured, minutes stretched into hours, or maybe seconds became lifetimes. I couldn't tell. The walls leaned closer, breathing with me, contracting, expanding. My reflection in the mirror fractured, multiplying into dozens and hundreds, each face screaming, each mouth twisted, each pair of eyes accusing, knowing, patient. I remember the notes from the guest records, names that vanished, names that reappeared. I saw my own name flicker on the pages of my mind. One day, it would appear in a filing cabinet, brittle and yellowed, a proof of existence that the motel required. And I realized I wasn't leaving. Not tonight. Not ever. Not as long as the motel wanted me here. I could feel it. A slow pull toward the bed. The walls pressed. The shadows closed in. The air grew thick enough to taste. I tried to scream. I tried to fight. But the motel doesn't respond to screams. It doesn't need to. It only waits. Always waits. The mirrors reflected it all. Infinite hallways, infinite rooms, infinite shadows. And in each one, I saw myself older, thinner, paler, exhausted, still try to leave, still try to resist. But I could see the futility in my own eyes. The motel doesn't just trap the body. It traps time, memory, will. And then I understood completely. Checkout doesn't exist here. The night doesn't end. You don't leave. The motel keeps you, folds you into its record, into its walls, into its breath. And the longer you resist, the more it enjoys the process, the more it learns your fears, catalogs your thoughts, feeds on the parts of you that cling to hope. I curled into myself, rocking slightly, listening. The breathing had slowed, becoming patient, and knowing. Shadows pulled, stretched, leaned. The corners of the room pinched closer. I could feel them against my back, my legs, my arms. I was contained, complete. The mirrors multiplied. I could see hundreds of me, each one in fear, each one trapped, each one screaming silently at nothing. And I realized it was all me. The motel had folded me into its reflection. I was every record, every lost guest, every shadow I'd ever feared. The air grew warmer, heavier, as if the room itself was pressing a slow, deliberate heat into me. The floorboards bent under my weight, walls tightening, ceiling leaning, the corners closing in inch by inch. My breath was loud, ragged, echoing against surfaces that weren't surfaces, making shapes move, making shadows stretch, making whispers murmur behind my eyes. I couldn't leave. I would never leave. And the motel would watch. Always. I remember the last thing before I lost a sense of time completely. The bed shifted slightly closer. The ceiling tilted down. Shadows pressed into me. And the breathing, my own and theirs in the motels, became one. Checkout is a lie. Escape is a lie. The motel always wins. And now it knows me completely. I am part of it. I always have been. The room closes in. And I wait. I shouldn't have stayed late that night. I knew the warehouse would be empty. It always was. That's what I told myself. Empty, quiet, nothing but the hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft whistled air through the cracks in the walls. But I was wrong. I was stacking boxes in the far corner, the smell of cardboard and dust thick in my nose, when I heard it. The first footstep, soft, deliberate, echoing across the concrete floor, though the room was empty. I froze. My hands hovered over the boxes, heart hammering. It was too regular, too precise to be imagined. Another step, then another. I tried to convince myself it was my own echo, bouncing back from the metal shelves and walls. But it wasn't. My own footsteps sounded different, slower, clumsier, and always behind me. I stopped moving. Listened. The steps continued, slow, deliberate, following, never rushing, never halting. I could feel them, like a weight pressing against the back of my neck. Hello. My voice cracked, swallowed immediately by the cavernous space. No answer, just the footfalls pacing patient. I started walking toward the exit, slow, careful. The steps mirrored mine. I turned sharply. Nothing. The warehouse was empty, just empty shelves, stacked boxes, and the smell of dust. And then came the knocks. Not the footfalls this time, but soft, deliberate raps against metal and wood. A box fell over in the far corner, though I hadn't touched it. My stomach clenched. My breath came fast. I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. But the warehouse was like a living thing tonight, stretching, folding in subtle ways. Every corner seemed farther away than it should have been. Every wall slightly out of place. And the knocks came again, rhythmic, taunting, echoing off surfaces that shouldn't echo. I started toward the stairs. The exit was just beyond the office door, but with each step, I heard the footsteps closer, faster now, but still behind, never catching up, never overtaking me. And beneath them, faintly, I thought I heard laughter, distant, hollow, childish, almost like someone playing in the dark, but cruel. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was imagining things, but it crept into my chest, wrapping around my lungs, making it hard to breathe. I reached the office. The door wouldn't budge. Not a crack, not a squeak. I pulled, rattled the handle, but it held firm, as if the building itself had swallowed the frame. The footsteps didn't stop. They circled, pacing, following, anticipating. I backed away, pressed my hands to the wall. The metal shelves leaned subtly, shadows shifting along their edges. Something moved just beyond my vision, quick and deliberate, and I jerked my head toward it. Nothing, but the laughter grew louder, more deliberate, closer, mocking. I could feel it then, brushing my skin. Not air, something solid, impossible. I spun, flashlight shaking, sweeping over boxes, shelves, and the steel walls. The beam landed on a corner, where the shadows pooled thickly. Nothing was there, but the footsteps continued, slower now, patient again, circling, pacing, waiting. And every time I moved, every step I took, the rhythm mirrored mine, exact, deliberate. I was not alone. I knew that now, with certainty. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, that someone had snuck in before closing. But no one could move that quietly, that deliberately. And no one could vanish like this, leaving nothing but echoes and laughter. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. I counted the steps. Left foot, right foot, pause. Left foot, right foot, then the knock, then the laugh. And every time I turned, every time I tried to face it, it seemed to vanish, folding into the corners, hiding in shadows that weren't shadows. The warehouse was a labyrinth tonight. Every row of shelves stretched, twisted, subtly reshaping. I could hear my own heart in the echoes, hammering against the walls, and I knew it was being followed by something older, quieter, patient, waiting, learning. I remembered the first night I worked here. The warehouse had seemed endless then, but tonight it felt infinite, hollow, waiting. The boxes that had been stacked neatly days ago were now scattered, toppled, though no wind had passed. No one had touched them. The floor had faint scuff marks, scratches that weren't mine, leading nowhere, looping, circling. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs moved, but the warehouse seemed to extend beneath me, behind me, in every direction. The steps behind me quickened, circling, then slowed, deliberate, patient again. The laughter shifted, no longer distant. Now it was in my ears, behind me, whispering in tones I couldn't place, syllables I didn't understand but knew were meant to frighten. I stumbled toward a pallet, stacked high with boxes. The footsteps slowed. A hand, or something like a hand, brushed the edge of my shoulder. Ice ran through me. I jerked away. Nothing was there, but I could feel it. Warm, cold, solid, and impossible all at once. I pressed myself into the far corner, hugging a column. The footsteps paced in circles, taunting. The knocks followed, soft, sharp, deliberate. I could hear my own breath, uneven, shallow. I closed my eyes, telling myself it would stop if I stayed still. But I could still hear the rhythm. Step, step, knock, laugh. Step, step, knock, laugh. I remember the stories. Whispers among the night clerks. Footsteps that followed no one. Knocks that came from nowhere. Laughter that echoed after the building had been emptied. I had laughed at them once. I had told myself these were old tales, ways to scare new employees. But now, pressed into the cold steel column, listening to the impossible, I understood. It wasn't stories. It wasn't imagination. It was real, and it was patient. I tried the office door again. Locked. I tried the side exit. Locked. The front door. Locked. I pounded my fist, shouted, screamed, but my voice was swallowed immediately by the warehouse, swallowed by the steps and knocks and laughter, swallowed by the air itself. The shadows shifted again. I saw something in the corner of my eye, a shape, tall, thin, leaning from the shadows. I turned. Nothing. The shape lingered in the edge of my vision, moving closer, but never directly confronting me. The footsteps mirrored mine again, always behind, always learning. I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. The laughter slowed. The knocks grew faint, irregular, teasing. The footsteps paced, always pacing. I realized with a sinking certainty that I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't fight it, and I wouldn't see it, not truly. Not as long as the warehouse wanted me here. I remember the nights I'd walked these floors alone before, thinking the silence was comforting, the emptiness safe. It had never been safe. The emptiness had been listening, waiting, learning, watching. The shadows pulled at my feet. Shapes shifted. Boxes tilted as if nudged by invisible hands. The temperature dropped. My skin prickled. Hair standing on end. I wanted light, but the fluorescence flickered weakly. Shadows crawling where they shouldn't. I could feel it now. Close. Pressing against the edges of my mind. Brushing at my thoughts. The footsteps slowed. The knocks came from all around me. Not just behind, but from above, from the walls, from nowhere. The laughter shifted. No longer distant. No longer hollow. Now it was intimate, curling into my ears, speaking in tones I couldn't name, words I couldn't repeat, but meanings I understood. Fear, helplessness, patience. I tried to move, crawl, escape, but the warehouse had become a trap. The layout bent subtly, imperceptibly, as if the walls themselves were shifting, folding, stretching. Every aisle I tried to cross led me back here, to the same corner, to the same shadows, to the same sound. I pressed my face to my knees, rocking slightly. The footsteps continued, pacing, learning, marking the rhythm of my panic. The knocks came from nowhere, everywhere a deliberate drumbeat. And the laughter. I could feel it inside my chest now, resonating with my heartbeat, merging with it, claiming it. I whispered to myself, trying to remember what was real. The steel shelves, the boxes, the concrete floor, the fluorescent lights. But the warehouse didn't care for my memories. It had its own. It had patience older than me, older than the building, older than the world outside. I realized then that I wasn't being chased. I was being cataloged, measured, observed, stored. The footsteps, the knocks, the laughter, they weren't threats. They were proof that I existed. Proof that I could be noticed. Proof that the warehouse could bend me, shape me, claim me, without ever touching me. I closed my eyes, feeling the shapes around me, the invisible presence pressing closer, the steps circling, the knocks falling, the laughter curling into my mind. I understood then I would never leave. Not tonight. Not ever. I belonged to the warehouse now, just as those before me had belonged, just as the stories whispered, and the footsteps continued. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped back into the warehouse that night. The door had grown on its hinges, the echo of it lingering longer than it should. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, humming like they were holding their breath. I told myself it was just fatigue. I had worked late, my mind fraying at the edges. But even as I repeated that to myself, I felt it, the subtle shift in the air, the weight of attention pressing down. Boxes lined the walls, stacked neatly as they always were, or at least they had been when I left. But now, something was different. Subtle, almost imperceptible. I squinted, stepping closer. A box at the end of the far row was tilted slightly, though I had stacked it perfectly before I left. I reached out, fingers trembling, and straightened it. The second I released it, I swear it shifted again, minutely, almost impatiently. I blinked, maybe fatigue. I told myself that. I stacked a few more, moving down the aisle. When I turned my back for a moment, I froze. One of the boxes I had just adjusted had moved, not toppled, not fallen, shifted, on its own. A laugh bubbled in my chest, tight, nervous. My hands went cold. I took a step back, trying to convince myself it was the uneven concrete floor, the vibration of a truck outside, anything. But the warehouse was quiet, utterly still. I moved to the next row. I stacked boxes carefully, aligning edges, making sure the corners met perfectly. When I turned to leave, the boxes had shifted again. One leaned precariously. Another stacked itself atop a smaller one. Impossible balance, defying logic. My stomach churned. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to anchor myself to reason. I had been working late nights for months. I knew the warehouse. I knew the shelves, the floors, the boxes, the shadows. This was impossible. It had to be. But then I heard it, a soft scrape, faint, deliberate, coming from the row behind me. I whipped around. Nothing. Only the boxes, neatly aligned, now forming a stack taller than before, perfectly balanced. I didn't touch them. I hadn't moved. And yet, they had arranged themselves. I swallowed hard. My throat burned. I stepped closer. The stack wobbled slightly, then settled. I could feel it, something alive in the air, patient and watching. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave. But I couldn't. My legs felt rooted to the floor, my mind tethered to the impossible movement of the boxes. I picked up a box, carrying it to the other side of the aisle. I set it down carefully. I stepped back, my breath caught in my chest. The box had moved. Not far, not like it rolled or slid. It was shifted, perfectly aligned with the others, exactly where it should have been, but without my touch. I sank to the floor, hands on my knees. My mind raced. Maybe hallucination. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe I had finally broken down after weeks of late nights, of endless monotony and silence. But the air in the warehouse was too solid, too present. The smell of dust and cardboard was sharp, real, and the boxes, moving, arranging, stacking themselves, were undeniable. I tried to tell myself to leave. Get out, step outside, take a breath of normal air. But the moment I moved, the boxes reacted. One leaned toward me, another toppled slightly, then righted itself in a perfect, impossible balance. I could feel the intelligence behind it. Not human, not mechanical. Something else, patient and deliberate. I stood, backing away slowly, keeping my eyes on the boxes. My heart hammered in my chest. The fluorescent lights flickered again. Shadows stretched, warped across the walls, pulling in corners that shouldn't exist. I turned my head quickly. Another stack had shifted again, taller now, perfectly balanced, as if mocking my disbelief. I whispered to myself, voice tight, trembling. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. But I could feel it. That presence. Watching. Waiting. Learning. I remember the nights before, the faint footsteps, the whispers, the laughter. The warehouse had been quiet then. Silent. Safe, I thought. Foolish. Those were the nights before it decided I would notice. Before it decided I was ready to see. A box slid across the floor toward me. Not tipped. Not rolled. Gliding, silent, deliberate. I stumbled back. The movement wasn't random. It was aware. It knew where I was, what I feared. I froze, trying to control my shaking hands. The box stopped inches from me. I could feel the air around it thrum, pulse, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the stack. More boxes shifted, more leaned, more balanced in impossible configurations. The room felt smaller, tighter, alive. My breath came in shallow gasps. I could feel the weight of all those stacked boxes pressing down, pressing in, as if the warehouse itself was breathing around me. I tried to rationalize, to name it. Maybe a draft, maybe vibration from trucks outside, maybe my mind playing tricks. But the boxes moved too deliberately, too purposefully. They didn't topple. They didn't scatter. They stacked, aligned, arranged themselves with impossible patience. I sank to the floor again, pressing my hands on my face. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't make sense of it. My eyes darted across the warehouse. Each row, each shelf, each stack, they were alive. Not living, but aware. Responsive. Intelligent. And I was alone. Or so I thought. A soft scrape behind me made me jump. I turned slowly. A box had tilted slightly. I swear I hadn't touched it. Another leaned toward it, forming a miniature structure, impossibly stable. I shook my head, whispered, No, this isn't real. I pressed my back against a steel column, heart hammering. I could feel my mind fraying at the edges. The boxes weren't just moving. They were communicating, mocking me, testing me. I realized then that the warehouse didn't need hands. It didn't need faces. It just needed patience. And it had all the time in the world. I tried standing again. Carefully, slowly, I moved toward the exit. The boxes shifted in response, leaning, forming lines, creating paths that twisted and turned. The layout of the warehouse changed subtly with every step I took. I tried to walk straight, but I ended up circling back, ending where I started. The boxes guided me, corralling me, bending reality in ways I didn't understand. I fell to my knees, gripping the concrete floor. The fluorescent lights flickered violently. Shadows danced across walls and shelves. Boxes leaned impossibly, formed towers, toppled slightly and reformed. The air was thick, almost solid, pressing against me from all sides. I could feel my mind unraveling. Every rational thought slipped away, replaced by a pure, raw awareness. I was not in control. I had never been in control. The warehouse was patient, infinite, watching. It cataloged my fear, studied my reactions, adjusted its layout, shifted its contents, responded. I whispered, voice shaking, I'm losing my mind. The words sounded hollow even to me, because I was losing sense of time, of space, of self. The boxes moved when I looked away. The shadows shifted. The air pulsed. And the laughter, faint, distant, just beyond comprehension, threaded through it all. I crawled forward, hoping to reach the exit. My hands grazed boxes that shifted with each touch. My knees brushed the floor, leaving marks that vanished moments later. I turned my head. A tower of boxes I hadn't noticed loomed taller than the ceiling. They were impossibly balanced, defying physics, and yet stable. I blinked when my eyes reopened. The tower was taller, stretching, leaning slightly toward me, patient, deliberate. I pressed myself into a corner, hugging my knees, shivering. The boxes moved again, slowly, carefully, as if aware I was watching, as if learning the limits of my fear. Every shift, every lean, every alignment whispered a single truth. You are not alone, and you will not understand. I tried to scream. The warehouse swallowed it, My voice bounced back muffled, twisted, as if the walls themselves laughed. The boxes stacked around me formed lines, leaned, balanced, shifted. I could feel them watching, waiting, anticipating. The presence wasn't in front of me or behind. It was everywhere. And then I understood. It didn't need hands. It didn't need eyes. It didn't need a body. The warehouse itself was alive enough, patient enough, intelligent enough, and I was just part of its observation now. I curled into myself, trembling. The boxes stacked higher, leaned closer, shifted just out of reach. The fluorescent lights flickered one last time before settling. Shadows pooled. The air hummed with awareness. I realized with a sinking certainty that I wasn't leaving. Not tonight. Not ever. The warehouse didn't chase. It didn't frighten. It waited. Slowly. Patiently. And it was infinite. I pressed my hands over my ears. Tried to close my eyes. But I could still feel it. The boxes, the shadows, the subtle intelligence in the air, shifting around me, learning me. I whispered to myself, "It's not real. It's not real." But it was. I was trapped, and the boxes, they kept moving. I had always believed I could leave when I wanted. Always. Until that night. Until I realized the warehouse didn't just move boxes. It moved everything, including the very doors I thought were my escape. I stepped toward the exit at first, confident. The fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead, casting long, thin shadows along the steel shelves. My footsteps echoed normally at first, then stretched. A single step sounded like two, then three. I stopped. The echoes continued, not matching me, not my rhythm. Something else had learned how to move in this space. I reached the office door first. The handle rattled under my fingers. Locked. Not surprising, except I'd checked it moments before. I stepped back and tried the side exit. Same result. I ran to the front. The main sliding doors. Locked. Not just locked. The glass reflected the fluorescent light, but the handle vanished. Just blank wall where I remembered a door. I froze, my pulse thundering. My brain refused to comprehend what I was seeing. The warehouse had stretched bent. It had folded itself into a maze. I took a cautious step forward. The shelves seemed taller, rows longer, twisting at impossible angles. The aisle I had just walked now curved in a way it had never done. I swallowed, trying to breathe normally, but the air was thick, humid, suffocating in a subtle way, like it had density. Every inhale brought the scent of cardboard, dust, and something else. Something sour, metallic, impossibly close. The warehouse was alive, and it knew I had noticed. I started walking, slowly, careful. Every turn I took, I ended up somewhere familiar, yet wrong. Boxes that had been stacked neatly were now toppled, leaning, rearranged. Shadows stretched, warped. A faint laugh echoed from nowhere, bouncing across steel and concrete. Subtle at first, then mocking, intimate. "Hello." My voice trembled. The sound came back at me, distorted, like the building itself was speaking. No answer, only echoes, and the shuffle of footsteps behind me. Always behind. Not fast, not chasing. Just patient, waiting. I turned a corner sharply. The aisles stretched impossibly long, shelves towering above me, taller than they should have been. A single box shifted. I didn't touch it. I didn't even look at it directly. It moved anyway, sliding smoothly across the floor, stopping perfectly aligned with another stack. The faintest click echoed. Too precise, too deliberate. I pressed my back against a steel column, my chest heaving, eyes darting, trying to convince myself this was exhaustion, hallucination, stress. But the warehouse doesn't play tricks. It doesn't tire. It doesn't sleep. And it doesn't forgive. I tried another exit. The doors I remembered, metal, sliding, heavy, were gone, replaced by shelves, stacked impossibly, forming walls. Corridors I thought I knew twisted, folded, looped into themselves. Every aisle I entered ended up leading me back to the same section. Boxes leaned toward me, forming paths that closed off my movements. Corridors that didn't exist moments before, always guiding me, shaping me. I ran, tried not to. It didn't matter. I couldn't escape. The warehouse had folded in on itself. I could feel the weight of it pressing, the subtle pull of every wall, every shadow, every box aligned against me. The air vibrated faintly, humming with attention. I wasn't alone. I knew it. Footsteps behind me. Not fast, not chasing, pacing, deliberate, echoing in ways that made me question their origin. I tried to turn, see who or what. It was nothing, only shadows shifting, shapes curling at the edges of perception. Another laugh, soft, hollow, curling into my chest like smoke. I reached an aisle where boxes stacked impossibly high leaned precariously, yet remained balanced. I could feel the intelligence behind it. The warehouse wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was patient, deliberate. It understood my fear. It learned it, and it used it, shaping the paths, closing the exits, moving the walls and objects as if they were limbs of a single living organism. I pressed myself into a corner, knees drawn to my chest. Shadows pooled, stretching across the floor and walls. The fluorescent lights flickered. The air shifted. I felt it then. The presence. Not just the warehouse. Not just the movement of boxes and walls. It was here, watching, learning, patient, deliberate. I whispered to myself, voice trembling, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. The words barely made a sound, swallowed by the enormous breathing space. And then I realized they weren't just true. They were painfully, horrifyingly true. The footsteps circled. The faint scraping of metal echoed. Boxes shifted, leaned, balanced. Every sound, every movement responded to me, anticipated me, corralled me. I realized with a cold certainty that I was being studied, measured, cataloged, not for harm, not yet, but for understanding. I tried another turn, desperate. Every aisle seemed to stretch endlessly, folding back on itself. Shadows pooled thicker at the edges. I glimpsed movement in the corners of my vision, tall, thin shapes that bent at impossible angles, curling into the corners, retreating when I tried to focus. A faint echo of laughter brushed the edges of my ears, teasing, intimate, patient. I pressed my face to my hands, tried to ground myself. Concrete floor, metal shelves, cardboard boxes, fluorescent lights. Solid, real, normal. But nothing felt normal. The air had weight. The shadows had purpose. And the presence behind, always circling, had patience older than me, older than the building, older than the world outside. I tried to move again. Step, turn, crawl. The paths shifted. Every movement rearranged the space subtly. Walls closed slightly. Shelves leaned, forming barriers. The boxes shifted in response to my eyes, my gestures, my breath. Every action cataloged, noted, measured. I understood then with a sinking dread. I was not meant to leave. Not tonight. Not ever. The warehouse didn't just move objects. It moved reality. Folded it. Warped it around me. Shaping fear. Shaping my perception. Every exit. Every path. Every door that had existed. Gone. Replaced by the maze it wanted me to navigate. And the presence, whatever it was patient. Immensely patient. I pressed myself into a corner, hugging my knees, trying to calm my breathing. But the footsteps continued. Not fast, not chasing, but always circling, echoing. The faintest knock, then another from every direction at once. And the laughter, faint, distant, curling into my ears, resonating with the rhythm of my heartbeat, merging with it. I could see the boxes shifting even without looking, towers forming, leaning, balancing, precise, deliberate, impossible. The warehouse wasn't haunted in a normal sense. It was alive in its own way, patient and aware, shaping reality as it pleased. I realized then that the presence wasn't just behind me. It was everywhere, in the walls, in the boxes, in the air, watching, learning, and I was trapped in its attention. Every thought, every fear, cataloged, measured, noted. I wasn't alone. I never had been. I tried to scream. My voice was swallowed instantly, twisted, echoed back to me distorted. The laughter mingled with it, a chorus of impossibility. Shadows pulled in corners, edges of perception, moving subtly, curling into impossible shapes. Boxes shifted in response to the sound of my panic. I pressed my back against a leaning stack, tried to ground myself, tried to remember what was real. Concrete floor, steel shelves, fluorescent lights, cardboard boxes. But the warehouse had abandoned those rules. It folded space, closed exits, shifted reality. And I was just a subject in its experiment. I thought of all the nights I had worked here before, thought the silence was comforting, the emptiness safe. Foolish. Those were the nights before it decided I would notice, before it decided I was ready to see, before it decided I would be cataloged, studied, trapped. The footsteps slowed, patient, circling, echoing. The knocks shifted to above, behind, everywhere at once. The air thickened, almost solid, pressing in. The shadows pooled. The boxes leaned, formed impossible towers, balanced against laws of gravity I understood or thought I did. And then I understood fully. I was never alone. I had never been alone. The warehouse itself, patient, deliberate, intelligent in its own impossible way, had always been observing, waiting, learning, and now it had me. I pressed my face into my knees, rocking slightly, tried to breathe. The footsteps paced. The air throbbed. The boxes leaned. Shadows curled. The fluorescent lights flickered. And the laughter, soft, hollow, intimate, threaded through every sound, every movement, every corner. I whispered, voice trembling, "I'm not alone. I'm not alone." The words felt small, insufficient, pathetic, and they were true, infinitely true. I understood then, with a chilling clarity, that I would never find the exit. Not tonight, not ever. Every turn, every aisle, every wall, every box, every shadow, all controlled, all deliberate, all watching. And then I realized the warehouse didn't just move boxes. It moved me, my perception, my understanding, my fear. It had always been moving me, always watching, always patient. I pressed my hands to my ears, tried to close my eyes. But the footsteps, the knocks, the laughter, the shifting boxes, the curling shadows, they were everywhere, all at once. And I understood the truth, horrifying, absolute. I am not alone, and I never have been. The factory was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the building had forgotten what it sounded like when people were inside. Usually, there was a hum of machines, the squeak of conveyor belts, the soft murmur of my co-workers. But tonight, all of that was gone. Only the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, casting long, uneven shadows across the polished concrete floor. I glanced at the clock on the wall above the loading bay. It was close to midnight. I had volunteered for overtime, thinking it would be easy money and a chance to catch up on paperwork. But the moment I stepped inside, a chill crept down my spine, slow and deliberate. The factory felt different, larger, empty in the wrong way. Not silent because it was resting, but because it had decided to be. I shook my head, trying to push the feeling aside. Just nerves, I told myself. I had been working late shifts for years. I knew the loneliness. I knew the silence. But something in the air felt wrong, like the building was waiting for something, waiting for me. I walked past the rows of idle machinery, each piece polished and still, casting long reflections on the concrete floor. My footsteps echoed. I stopped listening, nothing but the buzz of the lights and my own pulse in my ears. I shook my head again, focusing on the stack of forms I needed to complete. Easy work, simple numbers, nothing to scare a man awake. I glanced at the clock again. Something in me froze. The second hand was moving backward. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Stupid, I told myself. Maybe I misread it. But I looked again. It was true. Tick, 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 backward. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. Maybe a battery malfunction. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. I tried to focus on my work. Stacked papers in front of me, calculator in hand. But the backward ticking settled into my chest, a rhythm I could feel, slow and deliberate. The factory felt colder. Shadows stretched differently, longer, thinner. The hum of the lights buzzed higher, sharper. I felt the air press against my skin in a way that wasn't normal. Something wasn't right. And then I noticed the machinery. I had walked past it moments ago, silent and still. Now, a single conveyor belt was moving, slowly, backward, against all logic. I froze, hand hovering over the calculator. I told myself I had imagined it, but I hadn't. I watched the belt crawl in reverse, metal clinking softly, the crates shifting in the wrong direction. My heart began to hammer in my chest. I backed away, scanning the factory floor. Everything else remained still. Only that belt, that single motion in the wrong direction. I could hear it, faint but deliberate, dragging across the metal. And then I realized the sound of it wasn't the only sound. Beneath it, almost imperceptible, was another rhythm. Footsteps, soft, pacing, not mine, not coming from any direction I could identify. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was security guard, maybe someone checking the floor. But the footsteps didn't sound like a person. They were steady, regular, deliberate, circling, waiting. I turned, eyes scanning the long, darkened rows. Nothing, only my reflection in the polished metal surfaces, distorted and stretched in the flickering light. I moved cautiously toward the belt, heart hammering. Each step echoed, carrying more than my presence. The footsteps continued, pacing softly behind me, around me, though nothing was there. The backward tick of the clock mingled with it, a low, insistent pulse that made my chest ache. I tried to step closer to the control panel for the belt. Maybe I could stop it, reset it, but the panel wouldn't respond. Buttons pressed, lights flickering, nothing changed. And then the belt shifted faster. Not forward, not normal, faster backward. Crates rattling against each other as if they carried weight I couldn't see. A laugh, soft and distant, brushed against the edges of my hearing. I froze, spinning slowly. Nothing, only the lights flickering. The conveyor belt moving backward. The clock ticking backward. The footsteps circling. I felt my hands tremble. I leaned against a metal support beam, trying to calm my racing heart. Maybe I was imagining it all. Maybe the factory had finally gotten into my head after years of lonely nights. But the sound of the backward tick, of the metal scraping, of the faint footsteps, it was real. Too real. I glanced at the clock again. The hour hand was moving backward now. Slowly, deliberately. The numbers on the face seemed to distort slightly, warping, bending. I rubbed my eyes. Nothing helped. It was as if time itself had twisted in this room, this building, on this night. I turned back to the conveyor belt. The crates rattled, shifting as if alive. I could swear they leaned toward me, subtle and perceptible. But there, my pulse accelerated. My rational mind screamed at me to leave, to run, to escape into the night. But I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the concrete floor. The footsteps grew louder, circling. Soft, deliberate, patient. I tried to locate them. Turned, spun, moved forward, backward. The sounds followed, keeping pace, perfectly mirrored. Not ahead of me, not behind. Beside me, everywhere, nowhere. I felt a cold sweat run down my spine. The lights flickered violently. Shadows pooled, thickened, curling along the walls of machinery. Shapes stretched. Shapes that shouldn't exist in the stillness of a closed factory. I could see them in the corner of my eyes, vanishing when I tried to focus. The conveyor belt stopped suddenly. I exhaled, heart racing, thinking maybe it had given up, but the stillness was worse. Silence pressed in. The footsteps stopped. The backward ticking of the clock slowed, almost measured, almost conscious. I could feel it watching me, waiting, learning. I stumbled back, hand brushing the metal of a nearby machine. It felt warmer than it should, pulsing, alive. I told myself to breathe, to stay rational. But the laughter returned. Soft, close, intimate, curling into my chest. Not from anywhere. Not anywhere at all. I backed into the corner near the loading bay, trying to make sense of it. The backward tick, the steps, the movement, the shapes, everything conspired to remind me that I was alone, yet not alone. The factory wasn't just empty. It was aware. It was alive. And it had been waiting. I remembered stories from co-workers, tales whispered on long nights, strange occurrences, machinery moving, clocks running backward, sounds with no source. I had laughed at them once, thinking the isolation made them paranoid. Now I understood. The stories were warnings, signs, evidence. I had ignored them. Foolish. I tried the office door. Locked. Security had left hours ago. I tried the exit near the shipping dock. Locked. Not just locked, but gone. Replaced by rows of steel shelving that hadn't been there before. Corridors I remembered twisted, shifted, folding in ways that defied logic. I stumbled backward, tripping over a crate. The metal scraped against the concrete, echoing impossibly long. The footsteps resumed, circling, patient, deliberate, not trying to chase me, just present, aware of me. I could feel them in my chest, in my spine, in my mind. I pressed my back against the wall, eyes darting across the factory floor. Shadows pulled in corners, stretching unnaturally. Shapes moved, vanishing when I looked directly. The clock ticked backward. The conveyor belt creaked, crates rattling softly, and the footsteps circled, soft, intimate, unrelenting. I realized then, with a sinking dread, that I had no control, that I had never had control. The factory had waited for me to notice, waited for me to see, and now I was its subject, observed, measured, cataloged. I tried to scream. The sound caught my throat, swallowed immediately. The laughter returned, curling around me, mingling with the echoes of backward time and shifting metal. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the footsteps, the ticking, the laughter, it was everywhere inside me, around me, merging with the rhythm of my pulse. I sank to the floor, hugging my knees. The fluorescent lights flickered. The conveyor belt shifted slightly. Crates rattling as if alive. Shapes moved just beyond perception. Shadows pulled, stretching, curling. The backward tick of the clock persisted, slow, deliberate, mocking. I whispered to myself, voice barely audible, I need to leave. I need to leave. But I couldn't. The factory wasn't just a building. It was aware, patient, intelligent, and I, alone, exhausted, terrified, was trapped inside its observation. Time itself had turned against me. Or maybe it had never been normal to begin with. I pressed my face to my knees, trying to ground myself in the concrete, in the steel, in the metal of machines. The sounds continued. The laughter curled into my mind. The backward tick became my heartbeat. The footsteps were everywhere, yet nowhere. And then the horrifying realization settled in, icy and absolute. I was not alone. I had never been alone. The factory had been waiting for me, and it would not let me go. The factory never felt empty before. Not like this. After the first night of overtime, when the clock had ticked backward and the machinery had moved on its own, I thought I understood the space. I thought I knew its rules. I was wrong. I returned the next night, driven partly by curiosity, partly by the stubborn need to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The fluorescent lights hummed above. There was a thin, constant whisper. Shadows stretched long across the concrete floor. But tonight, they didn't stay where they should. They flickered, stretched, sometimes pulsing slightly, like something underneath the surface was shifting. I moved slowly through the aisles, heart tight in my chest, ears straining for the soft, impossible footsteps that had followed me last time. The conveyor belts were idle, the crates still, or so I thought. Then I saw them. Figures. Human, I thought at first, but wrong. Wrong in the edges. Wrong in the way the shadows clung to them. They flickered, blurred, almost transparent, like smoke in the corners of your vision. And they weren't just standing there. They were moving, reenacting, A man fell from the platform, arms flailing. I froze. My stomach churned. I knew that fall. Years ago. Someone had slipped on that very platform, broken their neck. The factory had never replaced the guardrail. And there he was, or a shadow of him. Falling again, impossibly real, impossibly wrong. I blinked. The figure vanished. Only the echo remained, the soft, wet snap of bones breaking. Carried across the polished floor like a whisper. My hands trembled. I pressed them against the cold metal of a nearby shelf. Trying to anchor myself to reality, another figure appeared. A woman, leaning over machinery. Her hair fell into her face, obscuring it. She tripped, tangled in cords, falling into whirring gears. I recognized her too. I had been there when the accident happened years ago. The gears had chewed through her sleeve, and she had screamed. No one could forget that scream. I could hear again now, muffled but horrifyingly present. I stumbled back. The shadows swirled around me. Each aisle seemed alive, pulsing, responding to me. More figures appeared, each reenacting accidents, injuries, deaths I remembered or had only heard about. One by one, the shadows told the factory's hidden history. Silent, deliberate, perfect. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. I couldn't look away. The shadows moved in slow, deliberate loops. Every fall, every injury, every mistake repeated endlessly. Not for my understanding, not for my warning, for my observation. I tried to tell myself they weren't real, that it was a trick of the lights, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But the echoing sounds, the wet snap of bone, the metallic clatter of falling crates, the faint screams, were too vivid, too intimate, too wrong. A figure appeared directly in front of me, a man, arms extended, falling backward. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. Hollow, empty but aware. I felt the weight of his gaze, the unbearable presence of someone trapped in the loop, watching me as I watched him. My breath caught. I stumbled back, tripping over a crate, and the figure vanished as if he had never existed. I turned in a slow circle. The shadows were everywhere now, weaving through the rows of machinery, dancing across the walls, flickering at the edges of my vision. They moved with precision, enacting scenes I could barely comprehend. Scenes of pain, scenes of fear, scenes I had long buried in memory, now thrust into the fluorescent light with unbearable clarity. I remembered the night shift safety logs, the whispered stories from co-workers, how accidents seemed to cluster, how machines seemed haunted, how the factory claimed nothing was wrong, even when people disappeared. I had laughed before. Now I didn't dare. The laughter that escaped me was hollow, swallowed by the shadows themselves. I moved cautiously through the aisles, heart racing. Every step I took was mirrored by a shift in the shadows. Figures appeared where there had been none, falling, tripping, breaking, dying. It was as if the factory itself remembered every moment of pain it had witnessed and chose to show it to me now. I reached the far end of the floor, near the old loading dock. The shadows thickened there, more defined, sharper edges than before. A man's figure crouched over machinery, reaching for a lever. I knew this one. A decade ago, he had been crushed by the press. I had seen the accident report. I had never seen the man. Now here he was. The shadows of him moving exactly as the reporter described. Eyes wide, mouth open, silent scream forever looping. I felt bile rise in my throat. My hands shook so badly I couldn't steady them on the railing. I told myself to leave, to run, but I realized that the exits had subtly shifted. The doors I had walked past countless times were farther away. Some were gone entirely, replaced by endless rows of steel shelving. My panic rose. Figures appeared in my peripheral vision, reenacting falls, collisions, fires, every kind of industrial mishap. I had studied safety protocols. I had seen reports. But these shadows didn't adhere to laws of time. They repeated. They layered. One shadow fell into a conveyor belt, while another replayed the same scene a fraction of a second behind, overlapping, creating a dense, impossible tapestry of accidents. I pressed myself into a corner, trying to shut it out. But the figures were patient. They moved with deliberation. Not fast, not chasing, just observing, enacting, showing, and I was forced to watch, forced to remember, forced to see the pain I had tried to forget. A shadow turned toward me directly. A woman, hair falling over her face, hands reaching for the safety lever she had failed to pull in life. Her eyes, or what should have been her eyes, were hollow pits of black, and yet they saw me. I felt them piercing through me, recognizing me. A silent accusation, a warning. I couldn't look away. I stumbled backward, tripping over cables. My head hit the metal edge of a crate. Pain lanced through me, but I barely noticed. My eyes were drawn to the shadows, to the repeated motions, to the figures that should have been gone years ago but were alive in this place, trapped in some unholy loop, forever replaying the moments that ended their lives. I thought of the clock, the backward ticking, the impossible machinery. Maybe it wasn't time that had shifted. Maybe it was memory. Maybe the factory had folded the past into the present, forcing me to witness it, to observe it, to internalize it. I could feel my mind fraying at the edges, every nerve ending screaming that what I was seeing shouldn't exist. I remembered the night I had worked overtime months ago, long before the clock had ticked backward. I had thought the factory was just quiet, empty, safe. I laughed at the notion of haunted machinery, the rumors of cursed night shifts. Now I understood. Silence had always been deliberate. The absence of sound had always been preparation. The shadows had always waited. A group of figures appeared at once, reenacting a massive accident from years ago. Sparks flew, metal bent, cries echoed. I could feel the heat from the shadowy flames, the thrum of impact vibrating through the concrete. My knees buckled. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but the echoes penetrated, entwined with my heartbeat. I wanted to scream, to run, to break free, but the shadows followed, circling, enacting, patient. They weren't chasing me. They didn't need to. I was already ensnared, already trapped in the web of memory, of time, of the factory's awareness. I realized in the horrifying truth, these weren't ghosts. They weren't memories. They were extensions of the factory itself. Patient, deliberate, observant. Every accident, every death, cataloged, stored, waiting for me to see. And now I had. I pressed myself further into the corner, rocking slightly, whispering to myself, "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." But I knew it was. Every sound, every flicker of shadow, every reenactment of pain screamed that it was. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. Figures turned toward me simultaneously. Hollow eyes, empty faces yet aware. Their movements synchronized with the backward tick of the clock, with the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, with the faint scrape of machinery that should have been still. I could feel the factory watching me, measuring my fear, noting my reaction. Patient, intelligent, unforgiving. I pressed my face into my knees. The shadows moved closer, forming patterns, layering accidents upon accidents, memories upon memories, until the entire factory floor seemed alive with the echoes of pain and death. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. And then I understood fully. I was never alone. I had never been alone. The factory had always remembered. It had cataloged every misstep, every injury, every death. And now, after years of waiting, it had chosen me to witness it, to see it, to understand it. I whispered, voice trembling, "I see it, I see it." The shadows continued their motions, indifferent, patient. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the echoes penetrated. The movements replayed in my mind even when I closed my eyes. I realized then, with a cold, sinking certainty, that I would never forget this night. The factory would not let me. The shadows would not let me. Every fall, every collision, every scream had been stored, cataloged, and now they were mine to carry. And I understood with absolute clarity. I was not alone. I had never been alone. The factory had remembered, and I would never leave its memory. I thought I had understood the factory. After the backward clock, after the shadows replaying accidents, I believed I could navigate, if only carefully, if only cautiously. I was wrong. Shadows pooled, shapes flickered. The ceiling seemed to pulse, bending, warping, as if the factory were breathing. I was not alone. I had never been alone. Every accident, every tragedy, every scream had been stored here, waiting. And now, the factory had decided I would witness them all. I pressed my hands over my face, trying to block it out. But the images, the shadows, the echoes followed me inside myself. I could see the falls, the crashes, the twisted metal, the silent screams even with my eyes closed. Time had folded over itself. Reality had folded over itself. I was trapped, and then, slowly, deliberately, I understood. The factory didn't just replay its history. It lived in it. It existed in every tragedy, every scream, every misstep, every fall. It was alive in that. And now I had entered it. I whispered, voice shaking, "It's all here. It's all here." The shadows didn't respond. They simply moved, endlessly, silently, layering memory upon memory. And I, caught in the loops, realized with suffocating clarity that I would never leave. The factory had always remembered. And now, so had I. I've been driving for hours. The hum of the tires against asphalt, my only company. The highway stretching like a black ribbon under a sky too dark to tell where it ends. Every mile marker flickers past. A small, lonely reminder that I'm still moving, still alive. But there's something about this stretch of road tonight. Something that presses against the inside of my skull. I can't put my finger on it. And that alone is starting to gnaw at me. The neon sign appeared out of nowhere, blinking weakly in the foggy distance. Sunny Pines Motel, it said. Funny name for a place that felt anything but. I slowed the rig, the engine rumbling as my headlights cut through the mist, illuminating chip paint, the empty gravel lot, and the faint silhouette of a woman behind one of the curtained windows. She didn't move, didn't wave, didn't blink, just watched. I told myself it was my imagination. It had to be. Pulling into the lot, I parked under a flickering lamp that smelled faintly of mildew and gasoline, the kind of smell that sticks in your lungs and refuses to leave. I leaned back in my seat and stared at the building, counting the doors. Each one seemed like it was waiting, like they knew I was coming. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scrape of something metal, maybe a sign swinging, maybe not. I grabbed my bag and stepped out. The air was colder than it should have been. It settled against my neck like a wet cloth. The gravel crunched under my boots. Every step felt loud, like the world was holding its breath. I made it to the lobby door. It was unlocked, but it didn't open easily. The knob felt sticky under my hand, and when I pushed, the door gave a groan that echoed down the empty hallway behind it. Inside, the motel smelled of bleach and something else, something sweet and rotting. The walls were faded yellow, decorated with pictures of landscapes that didn't exist, mountains that seemed to twist just slightly when you looked at them for too long. The front desk was empty. A bell sat there, dusty and tarnished. I rang it once, twice, nothing. I was about to call out when I noticed a mirror behind the desk. My reflection stared back at me, but there was something off. My eyes were too wide, my lips too tight. A shadow moved behind me, just at the edge of the glass. I whipped around. Empty hallway, just a hallway leading to the rooms. I laughed at myself nervously and shook my head. Trucking alone for years will do that to a man. Makes you see things that aren't there. I picked a key from the rack. Room 7. The key was heavy, old and cold, as if it had been sitting in someone's pocket for 100 years. The hallway leading to my room smelled like damp carpet and something else I couldn't name. I kept my hand on the key, ready to turn and bolt if I needed to. The walls seemed to lean in, and I realized the light bulbs were all dim, flickering just enough to make the shadows dance. Room 7 was smaller than I expected, furnished with a bed, a nightstand, and a dresser with one drawer left slightly open. The air felt thick, pressing down on my chest. I set my bag down and checked the window. Outside, the fog hung low, curling around the gravel like smoke. There were no cars, no people, just the sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of the highway. I tried to shake the unease, telling myself it was just the isolation, the long hours, the monotony of life on the road. I turned on the TV. Static. No signal. Of course. I cursed under my breath. I grabbed my phone, no service. Just like that, the motel had swallowed me whole. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady myself. The shadows of the room seemed deeper than they should have been, pooling in corners and beneath the dresser, like ink seeping through floorboards. I tried to convince myself they were just tricks of the light, but my skin prickled and my throat felt tight. I felt watched. A soft sound came from a hallway. A shuffle, maybe a sigh. My first thought was another guest, but then the hallway was empty when I looked. I told myself I imagined it, but the sound returned closer this time, a slow, deliberate footstep that didn't match the echo of the carpet. I grabbed my flashlight from the bag, pointing it toward the door. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing, but I could still feel it, the presence, watching me, waiting. I wanted to leave, to run back to my truck, and never look back, but something held me there, a mixture of curiosity and fear, tangled together like barbed wire in my chest. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. Time had lost its shape. The shadows shifted again, closer to the corner near the window. I could swear a figure crouched there, just barely visible, hidden in the folds of the dark. My heart pounded. My hands shook. I tried to blink it away, tried to remind myself that I was alone, that nothing lived in the shadow but dust and maybe a mouse. And then I heard it, whispering, soft, raspy, almost like someone breathing my name. I froze. My ears strained, but the words didn't make sense. They sounded like they were just on the edge of comprehension, like a memory trying to surface but failing. My fingers gripped the flashlight so tightly, the metal dug into my palm. I forced myself to stand. I had to see. I had to know. I stepped toward the window, the floorboards creaking beneath me. The fog outside twisted as though alive, and in its gray folds I saw them. Faces, hundreds of faces, pressed against the glass, staring, eyes wide, mouths frozen open in silent screams. They melted back into the fog the instant I focused, leaving nothing but mist and my own reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed and pale. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the bed. The flashlight rolled across the floor, and in its beam, the room looked different. The corners were sharper, the shadows longer, and the air heavier. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. My throat burned, dry and tight, as though the motel itself had swallowed my voice. I ran to the door, yanking it open, but the hallway stretched impossibly far, bending in ways that made no sense. Each step forward took longer, the carpet squishing under my boots like wet sponge. The walls seemed to lean closer, narrow in the passage until I had to squeeze between them. I could feel it moving with me, the presence, close enough that its cold seeped into my skin. I reached the lobby and slammed the door open to the night. The parking lot was empty. My truck was there just as I left it. Relief hit me in a wave, but it didn't last. From the corner of my eye, I saw the woman again behind the curtained window. She was smiling now, slowly, deliberately, her head tilting unnaturally to one side. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that promises you'll never leave. I didn't wait. I ran to the truck, threw myself behind the wheel, and started the engine. The rig roared to life, shaking under me as if aware of my terror. I didn't look back as I tore down the gravel lot, tires spitting stones. The fog clung to the lights, and for a moment, I thought I saw 100 faces press against the windows, watching, waiting. By the time I reached the highway, the motel had vanished. No sign, no lights, no gravel lot. Just a road, stretching ahead, empty and silent. My hand shook on the wheel. My heart refused to settle. I kept telling myself it was a trick of exhaustion, of solitude, of the endless miles. But deep down I knew that place was alive. I could feel it watching, following, storing me somewhere deep inside its walls, ready to wait until the next time I stopped. I drove on, windows closed, lights high. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every shadow in the cab seemed too dark. Every whisper of wind against the rig too deliberate. The road stretched on endlessly, and the highway lights became my only companions. flickering past like the eyes of unseen watchers. I kept moving, but the memory of that motel, the faces, the whispers, the cold weight of unseen eyes, stayed with me, crawling along my spine, refusing to let go. By morning, the fog had lifted, and the highway looked normal again. Too normal. I tried to tell myself it was over, that it was just a lonely, isolated place playing tricks on a tired trucker. But the unease lingered, sticky and constant. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I see those faces in the fog again. I hear the whispering. I feel that cold weight pressing down on my chest, like the motel never really let me leave. And I don't think it ever will. I thought leaving the motel behind would be enough. That once I put miles between me and that foggy gravel lot, the feeling would vanish. It didn't. Not really. Not even close. My sleep had been shallow and twitching, haunted by shadows I couldn't name, by voices that lingered just on the edge of my hearing. I woke before dawn, sweat clinging to my shirt, stomach twisting, the rig humming quietly beneath me. I tried to push it aside, tried to tell myself I was fine, but the memory of that place was still inside me, a weight lodged in my chest. Hours passed. The road curved and stretched in monotony, gray and unbroken. And then, almost without warning, I saw it again. A building rising up in the mist, walls pale and peeling. The kind of concrete that had been sitting empty too long. No sign, no name, just a long driveway that seemed to twist and extend as if reaching for me. My hands tightened on the wheel. I didn't want to stop. I tried to keep going. But something in the pit of me, fear, curiosity, maybe both, pulled me toward it. I parked at the edge of the lot. The asphalt ended abruptly in a cracked, uneven walkway. I stepped out, boots crunching gravel that felt softer than it should, almost alive. The air smelled like wet plaster and old wood. As I approached the entrance, I saw the doors, room after room, each door identical, stretching farther than logic allowed. I could see them fade into the mist, and yet I knew they went on further and further, endlessly. I pushed the nearest door open. The room inside was empty, furnished with nothing but a bed and a small table. The air felt heavy, almost viscous. I took a step in, and when I turned, the door I had entered from was gone. Just wall. My stomach dropped. I tried to laugh, a short, dry sound. No, this isn't real, I whispered, but my voice sounded tinny hollow, bouncing around the room in ways it shouldn't. I moved to the bed, hoping it was just a trick of my tired brain, but the sheets were stiff, rough, smelling faintly of decay. The table had a single drawer, slightly open, though I was certain it had been closed a second ago. Inside lay a notebook, blank except for a single sentence scrawled in shaky handwriting. You're already here. My pulse spiked. I dropped the notebook as if it burned me. I ran to the door again, hammering it with my fists, but it didn't budge. Panic clawed at me. I felt the room shift under my feet, stretching subtly, elongating, pulling the walls inward, making the air thicker. I stepped back, and when I looked at the bed again, the sheets had changed. They were now crumpled, tossed aside as if someone had been lying there, watching me. But the room had been empty. I could swear it. I tried to step forward, and suddenly I was in a hallway, long, endless. Doors on either side, all the same, all numbered sequentially, though the numbers made no sense. 7, 12, 3, 19, 2, they twisted and changed as I walked, every glance revealing a different sequence. The walls pulsed slightly, like they were breathing, the faintest vibration under my fingertips. My own breathing sounded too loud. I could hear it bouncing off the walls, echoing, distorted. I knocked on doors. No answer, only silence. Some doors were cold metal, others soft wood. Some didn't even have handles. I tried turning a few, but they disappeared when I got close, leaving nothing but wall. The air smelled faintly of smoke, then rotten fruit, then antiseptic. It shifted constantly, disorienting me. I began walking faster, trying doors, calling out. My voice sounded strange to me, hollow, like it belonged to someone else. The hallway extended beyond vision, curving impossibly. I tried to mark where I had been, leaving a scrap of paper on the floor. But when I turned back, it was gone. The hallway stretched uninterrupted, swallowing anything I tried to leave behind. I felt my stomach knot, dizziness rising. The ceiling seemed to stretch higher, the walls leaning inward and then apart. The world had lost its rules. A sound came from somewhere behind me. I froze. Footsteps. Slow. Soft. Not matching mine. I spun, flashlight shaking, but the beam revealed nothing. The darkness seemed to close in, dense, pressing against my face, my chest. And yet I could feel it moving, shifting just outside the circle of light. Watching. Waiting. I kept walking. I couldn't stop. I didn't want to, but something had me in its grip. Every turn led to another room, another hallway, another impossibility. Sometimes a door would open onto nothing, but a white void, a blank space where I could see nothing. Other times, it opened onto a room I'd been in before, though the sheets were tossed differently, the air thicker, the shadows darker. My mind started playing tricks. Or maybe it wasn't tricks. I saw a reflection in one of the hallway mirrors. For a second, it wasn't me. My face was older, hollowed out, eyes sunken and dark. I blinked. My reflection was normal again, but the memory of that other me lingered. I felt the walls pulse in response, like the building had taken note, recording me, mocking me. I tried to keep track of doors, numbers, anything familiar. Room 7 appeared again. My legs moved before my mind caught up. I opened it. It was my bed, my table, the same notebook. The sentence had changed. You can't leave. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. I read it over and over, try and make sense of it. I slammed the notebook shut and stepped out. The hallway had shifted. Now the doors were closer, pressing in on me. Shadows pooled where there should be none. Whispers curled around me. Soft at first, unintelligible. My name. My mother's voice calling me, but wrong. Too distant, too high, too low. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was me, but my heart hammered, a frantic drum in my chest. I ran. The hallway twisted under my feet, curving back on itself in ways that shouldn't exist. I could see doors ahead, then behind, then to the side. The whispers grew louder, murmuring in a language I almost recognized. Familiar words warped into something grotesque. The walls seemed to lean closer. I felt eyes on me. Hundreds of them, hiding in the corners, behind doors, watching me spiral. I stopped. I had to. I leaned against the wall, gasping. The hallway stretched out endlessly in both directions. I could see it bend, curve, doors opening and closing on their own. A faint light flickered ahead, then disappeared. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination. I needed to calm down. I needed to think, but every breath felt wrong. Heavy. The air smelled like iron and wet stone. I pressed forward. I had to, one step in front of the other. Doors opened, then vanished. Some rooms were empty. Others held fleeting glimpses, beds, chairs, shadows that moved. In one, I saw a figure sitting at the table, head in hands. When I blinked, it was gone. I could feel behind me, a presence that whispered, "Stay." Time lost meaning. Minutes became hours, or maybe seconds. I could no longer tell. My feet hurt. My chest ached. My hands trembled from gripping the flashlight too tightly. The hallway stretched endlessly, mocking me, pushing me forward, pulling me back. Every turn revealed new impossibilities, each more disorienting than the last. I stopped at a door number 13. Something about it made my stomach knot. I opened it slowly. Inside, nothing but darkness. I stepped in. The door vanished behind me. I was inside a void, the hallway and rooms gone. Just me, the darkness, and the soft whispering, repeating endlessly, echoing off nothing. I could feel the walls of the motel pressing in from all sides, closer, tighter, alive. I screamed. No sound came. I pounded my fist against the invisible walls. I ran in blind circles, tripping over unseen obstacles, falling, scraping, bleeding. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, until I couldn't distinguish my own name from theirs, couldn't tell my own voice from the shadows. I could feel the presence moving through me, under my skin, inside my mind. I collapsed, breathless, bleeding, trembling. The darkness swirled. A faint glow appeared far away, like a tiny a hallway, maybe the exit. I crawled toward it, limbs burning, heart hammering. As I drew closer, the doors appeared again, shifting, bending. I reached for the handle of one, praying it let out. It opened onto a room that looked normal. My bed, my table, the notebook. The words had changed again. You'll never leave. I sank to the floor. My flashlight flickered, then went out. I could hear it now. The walls, the floors, the ceilings, breathing, watching, waiting. The endless hallway wasn't just a hallway. It was alive, and I was inside it. I don't know how long I've been here. Days? Hours? Seconds? Time doesn't exist inside these walls. Only the endless stretch, the shifting doors, the watching, the whispering. I keep trying to find the exit, to mark my steps, to remember the real world. But the motel doesn't let me. The endless hallway is patient. It knows I'll tire. I'll slip, and when I do, it will be ready. I think I've finally realized the truth. I'm not trapped. I'm part of it now. The doors, the walls, the endless stretch, it is me. And I am it. I thought the endless hallway was the worst of it. I thought that when the doors shifted, when the walls breathed and the rooms vanished behind me, I had seen all the motel had to offer. I was wrong. I woke, or maybe I didn't wake. I was somewhere between sleep and the cold reality of the hallway. My body ached from crawling, from running, from falling over floors that didn't feel real. The flashlight was dead, my hands raw and scraped from trying to mark the doors. The air was thick, heavy, smelling faintly of wet wood and something sweet like rotting sugar. I could hear faint whispers, almost beneath the level of hearing, curling around me like smoke. I called out. My voice came back strange. It didn't sound like me. Hollow, echoing in a way that made my chest tighten. I told myself it was my mind unraveling. It had to be. That was the only explanation. But then I heard it. A whisper, soft, deliberate, almost intimate. Nimra? I froze. My name, not my real name, not anyone else's, but the name I used. The voice was inside the walls, inside the air, inside me. I swallowed. My throat burned. My hands trembled. I could feel it. A presence crawling beneath my skin, following me, pressing it on every nerve. I stumbled down the hallway, knocking on doors, trying to find someone, anyone, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The doors were all the same. Empty, cold, silent, until one door, the number I can't remember now. It changes every time I think about it, creaked open. I stepped closer. The hallway shifted behind me, bending impossibly, the doors stretching into infinity. Inside the room, the air was thicker, warmer, pulsing. The whispers were louder, clearer. Come here. It wasn't just the walls anymore. It was something inside the room, something alive. I could feel it moving, just beyond my vision, brushing against the edges of my senses. I wanted to run. My legs wanted to carry me away, but my feet felt glued to the carpet. I wanted to call for help, but my voice refused. And then I heard it again from deeper inside the walls. My name repeated, urgent now, almost pleading. Nimra, Nimra. I pressed my ear to the wall. The voice was close, too close, not coming from the room, but from within the walls themselves, vibrating through the plaster, the metal, the wood. My heartbeat sped up. I could feel the tremor of it under my hand. My fingers shook as I tapped on the wall. Who's there? I whispered. My voice sounded alien, hollow, and the walls whispered back. I've been waiting. My stomach twisted. I stumbled backward, hitting the bed, falling onto the floor. The whispering grew, layering itself, overlapping, voices that weren't my own but sounded impossibly human, calling, murmuring, laughing softly under their breath. My head spun. I pressed my hands to my ears. But it didn't stop. The voice came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, under the carpet, inside my skull. I could feel it following me. I could feel it watching, alive in ways that made no sense. I tried to make sense of it. It had to be a guess. Someone trapped here, hidden? That had to be it. My mind clung to that explanation like a lifeline. I moved to the door, tried to leave, but the hallway outside wasn't the hallway I remembered. It was longer, darker, doors closer together. I could feel shadows shifting behind the walls, curling like fingers, brushing at me. Every door I passed whispered, faintly, a name I didn't recognize. Every step I took made the air heavier, the whispers louder. I tried to run. My boots slipped on the carpet, and I felt the walls shift in response, leaning in, stretching out, making the hallway impossible. The whispering followed, coaxing, soft, gentle, cruel. My own name, repeated, until it became a chant, a rhythm beating in my chest. I reached a door that looked familiar. Room 7. The key was on the table inside, just as it had been before. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. The whispers were louder now, urgent, demanding. I tried to focus on reality, on the rig, on the highway, on anything outside this place, but it slipped further away with every breath. I opened the door. The room was empty, but the whispering didn't stop. It was in the walls. Inside me, I could feel it crawling under my skin. The air thickened, pressing down. I gagged, coughing, trying to clear my throat. And then I heard it. This way, the voice. Not my own, not a reflection. A guest, someone here. I could feel them, just beyond the walls, breathing, waiting, patient. My hands gripped the edge of the table. My heart hammered like a drum inside my chest. I wanted to see them, to prove they were real, to prove I wasn't going insane. I pressed my ear to the wall again. The whispering came clearer this time, from a point deep inside the motel's impossibly long corridor. Nimra, come. I took a step back, then another, my feet shuffling along the floor. The walls shifted as I moved, stretching, bending. The voice followed, patient, coaxing, seductive. I could feel the heat, the breath of it through the walls. I knew, deep down, that it was waiting for me, that it had been here all along, in the cracks, the plaster, the corners, watching. I tried the door across the hallway. Locked. I rattled it, pounding, trying to force it open. The whispers grew louder, layered voices, harmonizing into something human, something terrible. My name echoed inside the room, inside the hallway, inside my head. I stumbled down the corridor. The doors shifted, opening and closing, leading nowhere or everywhere. The whispering followed. Sometimes a syllable, sometimes a whole word. Nimra, it was patient, like it had all the time in the world. And I knew I did not. I stopped at a door. I don't remember the number. It opened silently, revealing darkness. I stepped inside. The air was warmer here, the whispers stronger, and then I saw it. A figure crouched, still, in the corner. Shadows of the face, but the outline, the movement was unmistakable. Alive, waiting. I froze. My breath caught. The whispering grew, urgent now, demanding. Nimra? The figure didn't move. The shadows clung to it, bending around it, pulsing like the walls themselves. I wanted to speak, to call out, to demand, but my voice failed. My hand shook so badly I could barely lift the flashlight. And then it stepped forward, slow, deliberate, not walking, but gliding, moving with a weightless certainty that terrified me more than anything I've ever known. The whispers followed it, swirling, layering, overlapping. My name, my voice, my thoughts. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. The walls, the air, the space itself did. I backed up. My mind scrambled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, trying to convince myself it was just a hallucination, exhaustion, fear, whatever I could cling to. But I knew, deep down, I knew it was real. Someone or something was here, watching, waiting, living inside the walls, inside the building, inside me. The figure raised a hand. A shadow, a suggestion of a hand. The whispers quieted for a moment, then resumed, softer, coaxing. I realized it wasn't trying to hurt me. Not yet. It was patient. It was waiting for me to understand, to accept, to join. I ran. My legs carried me down the hallway, doors twisting, the ceiling stretching impossibly. I could feel the presence behind me, patient, almost gentle in its pursuit. I could hear it whispering again, soft, low, my name, my name, my name. I stumbled into a room. Familiar. Room 7. The bed, the table, the notebook, and on it, a single sentence, scrawled in handwriting that wasn't mine. You can hear me. Now. We are here. Always. I fell to my knees. My hand shook. The whispers surrounded me. Inside the walls, inside the floor, inside my skull. I realized I could not leave. I could not escape. Someone or something was here, waiting, patient, watching, whispering. Always. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't exist in the walls of this place. Only the endless hallway, the doors that vanish, the shadows that move, and the voice that calls my name. Sometimes I try to fight it. Sometimes I pretend I am not listening. But it is impossible. It is everywhere in everything, inside me, outside me, surrounding me, waiting. I have learned to move silently, to follow the whispers when they call, to obey when they beckon. I know now that they are patient. They do not rush. They never leave. They will wait for me, and I will wait for them. And when the walls shift again, when the doors bend impossibly, when the hallway stretches into infinity, they will be there, watching, whispering, waiting, and I will answer. I thought I understood the motel. I thought I had seen its tricks, its twisted hallways, the way it bent and stretched. But I was wrong. Every instinct screaming at me that night told me I wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not until it was ready. I ended up back in the lobby. I don't know how. One moment I was stumbling through the endless hallway. Doors twisting in impossible sequences. Shadows following me like they had a life of their own. The next, I was standing in front of the front desk. The bell sat there, dusty and tarnished. Nothing else had changed. The place smelled the same, clean, chemical, and faintly sweet, like sugar rotting in a closed jar. My chest tightened. I pushed the door behind me. Thinking of running, of getting out to my truck, the highway, anywhere real, the door didn't budge. I tried it again, harder this time. Slammed my shoulder against it. Nothing. Just wall. I could feel the building pulse, a slow thrum to the floor and walls. It was alive, and it didn't want me to leave. I turned back toward the desk. The clerk was there, or at least someone that looked like him. He was small, thin, with a pale, hollow face. But the moment I looked, his eyes caught mine, and I felt it like he could see through me. Into me, every memory I thought was hidden. Every secret I had tried to bury on these lonely roads. His eyes were too still, too knowing, and they followed me as I moved. I swallowed. My hands trembled. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but my throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I forced a laugh, nervous and hollow. The clerk didn't move, didn't blink, just watched, waiting, judging. A door slammed somewhere behind me. Sharp, sudden, my stomach lurched. Another door, and another. The sound came from every direction at once. Doors I had walked through, rooms I had seen or thought I had seen, were shutting, slamming with a force that shook the lobby's foundation. The bell on the desk rattled like it was alive. I could hear the hinges screaming. I tried to move to find the nearest exit. The lobby stretched impossibly. Would have been a small, modest space now felt cavernous. The walls leaned in and out. The ceiling stretched high, low, bending like it was breathing. My mind raced. My heart pounded. The clerk's eyes never left me. I felt trapped, swallowed. "Can I help you?" I forced the words out, voice cracking. He tilted his head. The movement was slow, deliberate, unnatural. His mouth didn't move in time with his eyes. I couldn't tell if he was speaking or simply waiting. The longer I stared, the more his eyes seemed to shift, multiplying, fracturing, until it felt like hundreds of them pressed into my skull. The door slammed again, closer this time. I jumped. The lobby's lights flickered. Shadows stretched along the walls, gathering in corners, pooling beneath the furniture. They were alive, whispering, moving just out of sight. I felt them brush against my arms as I tried to move toward the door. I tried the front door again. Locked. Solid. No handle. Just wall. My breath came fast, shallow. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold on to the edge of the desk. I could feel the pulse of the building under my palms. It was alive, watching, anticipating my next move. I tried another door. Same result. Locked. Wall. I slammed my fist against it in frustration, pain shooting through my knuckles. And then I heard it. A soft, almost intimate whisper. Nimra. I froze. My name. Again. From everywhere at once. From the walls, from the floor, from inside my own head. I clutched my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't just sound. It was pressure, a weight pressing against my skull, my chest, my stomach. Something alive was in the walls, calling me, coaxing me. The clerk's eyes followed me as I backed up. Slowly, deliberately, he rose from behind the desk. Not hurried, not rushed, just moving with intent. Every step echoed unnaturally, long and hollow. My stomach twisted. The shadows behind him began to move independently, reaching, curling, stretching toward me. I wanted to run, but the doors kept slamming. One, then another, then another. Every potential exit swallowed by sound and movement. I realized then that the lobby wasn't static. It was a trap. Every exit I thought existed had already been taken. The building had rearranged itself around me. I was in its heart now, its pulse, its will. The clerk stopped a few feet away. The shadows pooled at his feet, writhing like smoke. I wanted to scream, but nothing came. My mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Panic roared in my chest, raw and physical. The whispering grew louder. My name, repeated over and over, entwined with laughter and murmurs I couldn't place. I backed into a wall. It felt wrong, solid, then soft, like it had a texture under my hands that shouldn't exist. The air smelled different here, like wet plaster, sugar, and metal. I gagged, choking. The clerk's eyes never left me. He raised a hand slowly, not threatening, not kind, but deliberate, a command. I stumbled. My hands shook. My legs threatened to collapse beneath me. The shadows crept closer, brushing my skin. I could feel cold seep into my bones. The whispers layered themselves, echoing in ways I couldn't follow. Each voice distinct. Each voice calling me, guiding me, mocking me. I tried the back door. Locked. Wall. I pounded it again and again until my knuckles bled. The pain felt good in a strange way. Real. Tangible. A reminder that I existed, at least for a moment, in this impossible space. But the building didn't care. It only waited. Patient. Immense. Alive. I turned toward the desk again. The clerk was closer. I could see the details now. Skin too pale, veins too pronounced, eyes impossibly wide, too human to be human. I felt my stomach twist. My mind teetered on the edge. My thoughts were no longer my own. The whispers had begun to insinuate themselves, overlapping with my own memories, rewriting, reshaping. Sit, the clerk said. His mouth moved slightly. His voice came from everywhere, inside my head, inside the walls, inside my chest. I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the carpet. The shadows stretched further, rising along the walls, pooling behind the furniture, curling around me. I tried to look away, but his eyes followed. Every blink, every turn, every breath. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall. My legs were shaking, my chest heaving. The whispers continued, patient, coaxing, promising, warning. I felt the pulse of the building synchronize with my heartbeat. I was part of it now, in its heart, its will, its trap. Hours or minutes, I don't know, passed. The lights flickered. Shadows danced. Doors slammed in rhythm with the whispering. My mind frayed. My name, repeated, layered over and over, intertwined with sounds I couldn't place. The clerk didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. He simply observed, a sentinel in the impossible space, reminding me that I was caught. I pressed my hands to my eyes, tried to block him, block the shadows, block the whispers, but it was no use. The lobby was alive, watching, waiting, and I was in the center of it. I tried speaking again. My voice was cracked, hoarse, alien. I just want to leave. The shadows shifted, and for a moment, the clerk's mouth twisted into a smile. But it wasn't a human smile. It was something patient, eternal, something that had seen all who tried to leave before me. The door slammed again. My breath caught. The ceiling stretched impossibly, walls bending. The lobby was infinite now, yet enclosed. I could feel the pulse beneath my palms, under my hands, through my chest. The whispers softened, coaxing, intimate. My name, my memories, my fears. They knew me better than I knew myself. I sank lower to the floor, curling in on myself. I realized then that resistance was pointless. The building didn't care. The clerk didn't care. The shadows didn't care. Only the waiting mattered, and I had become part of it. I can hear them now, always. In the walls, in the floor, in the ceiling. My name, my thoughts, my breath. The impossible, pulsing lobby stretches forever. Doors slamming, shadows twisting. The clerk watches, patient, eternal. And I wait, because that is all I can do. Because leaving is no longer an option. Because the lobby is alive. And it knows me. I thought night had limits. I thought it ended, that the sun would rise, that the motel's pulse would fade with morning light. But I was wrong. Dawn never comes here. Time doesn't move in the same way inside these walls. Hours collapse into minutes. Minutes stretch into eternities. The lobby, the hallway, the endless doors. They exist outside the world I once knew. Outside reason. I woke, or maybe I never slept. The air was thick and still, pressing against my skin, smelling faintly of wet plaster and old sugar. The shadows had not retreated. They moved when I blinked, curling at the corners of my vision, stretching along the walls, pooling beneath furniture that shouldn't be there. And I could feel them watching, patient, unmoving, waiting. I tried to leave. The doors in the lobby were solid. Wall. The ones I thought led outside bent impossibly, slanted inward, disappear in the moment I reached them. I pressed my hands to the wood, hoping for a handle, a latch, something, anything, but there was nothing. Only wall. The building hung beneath my fingertips, alive, aware of my frustration, my panic. I turned to the front desk. The clerk was there, sitting in impossible stillness. His eyes followed me as I moved, unblinking, alive in a way that made my stomach twist. I wanted to scream, to demand something, anything, but my voice refused to obey. It wasn't fear, not entirely. It was something older, something deep and primitive, clawing at the edges of my mind, telling me I was prey and it was patient. I started down the hallway. The doors shifted as I walked. Room numbers changed. Some disappeared entirely. Others appeared where they shouldn't have been. I tried to mark them, scratches in the wall, pieces of paper, but everything vanished as soon as I looked away. The motel didn't want me to remember. It wanted me lost. I heard whispers, soft, curling, deliberate, from behind the walls, from beneath the carpet, from above the ceiling. At first, I thought it was just the building's pulse, a trick of exhaustion and paranoia. But the whispers formed words. My name, my thoughts, memories I had buried for years. My childhood, my mistakes, my fears. The motel knew me better than I knew myself. I pressed forward because the stop was unthinkable. The hallway twisted, bending back on itself. Doors opened to rooms I had been in. No, rooms I had not been in. Rooms with beds made, tables set, shadows crouched in corners, observing. I could feel them, hundreds of them, watching, waiting. Unseen but aware. A door open ahead. A room dimly lit. I stepped inside. The shadows coalesced there. Faces emerged from the darkness. Indistinct but human. Pale, hollow-eyed, patient. They did not move. They did not speak. They simply observed. And I understood with a sudden, terrible clarity that I had been observed all along. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat had been cataloged. The motel wasn't empty. I had just never seen its true residents. They didn't blink. They didn't breathe. And yet they existed, alive in ways I could not comprehend. My chest tightened. My throat closed. My mind scrambled. I wanted to run. My legs betrayed me. I was frozen. From a far corner, a figure stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately. Its movements were graceful, unnatural, bending reality around it. I could see its eyes now, black, endless, reflecting everything I feared. And then I realized there were hundreds more lurking in every corner, behind every shadow, pressed into walls, embedded in floors and ceilings. The motel's pulse was theirs, their presence, their will. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall. The room stretched impossibly, elongating, narrowing, twisting in ways that made my stomach twist with it. The whispers intensified, layering, overlapping, calling my name, repeating my memories, my regrets, my failures. I could hear the building itself sigh, breathe, move, alive, watching, waiting. I tried the door behind me. Locked. Wall. I pounded, screamed, clawed, but the building only throbbed beneath my fists. The shadows moved closer, curling, stretching, brushing against me, brushing inside me. I could feel their cold seep into my skin, my bones, my blood. The fear was physical now, a crushing weight pressing from all sides. I backed toward the center of the room. The figures remained still, patient, observing. And then I understood they didn't need to move. They didn't need to speak. Their awareness was enough. I was exposed. Completely. Every thought, every secret, every fear laid bare. I sank to the floor. The whispers became voices, overlapping, distinct, layered into my consciousness. They recited memories I could not forget, moments I had tried to erase. My father's voice calling me lazy. My mother's scolding, faintly warped. Childhood humiliations. Teenage mistakes. Adult regrets. They recited them all. Patient, deliberate, and I could do nothing but listen. The clerk appeared at the doorway. Or perhaps he had never left. His eyes followed me, unblinking, watching me unravel. The shadows pooled at his feet, writhing like smoke. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape. I wanted to believe that the sun would rise, that morning would come, that the world outside was still real. But I knew it wasn't. It couldn't be. Dawn never comes here. I pressed my hands to my ears, try to shut them out, try and find a thread of sanity. But it was everywhere. Inside the walls, inside the shadows, inside me. I could feel it breathing with me, synchronized with my heartbeat. My mind began to fray at the edges. I could no longer distinguish between memory, thought, reality, and hallucination. I tried to focus. I tried to rationalize. Maybe this was sleep deprivation, exhaustion, the endless miles of lonely roads. But the figures didn't move. The shadows didn't bend. The whispers didn't fade. I knew, deep down, this was real. The motel had always been alive. It was never just walls and doors. It was awareness, patience, and it had claimed me. I forced myself to my feet. My legs shook, knees threatening to buckle. The shadows reached for me, curling along the floor, up the walls, pressing against me, brushing my skin. The voices whispered, coaxed, murmured. My name, my fears, my past. I stumbled down the hallway, doors twisting, bending, leading nowhere, everywhere. The figures remained in place, watching, patient. I was alone yet surrounded, unseen yet observed. I tried to run. My boots slipped on carpet that seemed alive, clinging to my feet. The hallway stretched, lengthening, curving impossibly. The ceiling pulsed overhead. The walls leaned closer, then receded, breathing. I could feel the motel pressing around me, folding reality in on itself. I passed the door. Room 7. Familiar. Safe. Maybe. The bed. The table. The notebook. I opened it. Words scrawled across the page. You can see us now. We see everything. Dawn will not come. You are ours. I dropped it. My hands shook. My head spun. The hallway bent further. Shadows pulled beneath the doors. The figures remained still, waiting, patient, eternal. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But nothing came. Only the whispers calling, coaxing, reminding me that I was exposed, vulnerable, entirely at their mercy. I pressed forward blindly, because to stop was unthinkable. I had no choice but to move, to follow the whispers, to obey the impossible geometry of the motel. Every step brought new horrors, rooms that should not exist, hallways that stretched into infinity, doors opening onto emptiness or onto rooms I'd already been in but changed in subtle, terrifying ways. I realized then that the motel's true residents were not merely watching. They were everywhere, in the walls, in the floors, in the air. I could feel them pressing against me. Inside me, whispering, breathing, their awareness was infinite, patient, eternal. And I was trapped within it completely, utterly. The clerk appeared again, closer this time. I could see the details. The hollow eyes, the pale skin, the slight, impossible tilt of his head. I understood then that he had always been waiting, patient, observing, guiding me. I could not leave. I would never leave. Not while the motel's pulse, its residents, its awareness existed. I sank to the floor again, trembling, exhausted, my body screaming for release that would never come. The shadows pulled around me, wrapping closer, curling, brushing my skin. The voices whispered endlessly, layering my own thoughts over theirs, intertwining, blending, erasing the boundary between me and them. I closed my eyes. I tried to hold on to who I was, but it was impossible. The motel claimed me. Its residents, unseen, observed, patient, were always there, always watching, always waiting. And I knew that dawn would never come. Not here, not for me. I will never leave. I am theirs, and they are everywhere.